common, yeah, why?
It's going again down.
Where though?
Rick's watching.
Can't be possible. I just switched over to YouTube.
There's a lot of yeah, a lot of money. So that's kind of
I don't know.
I got some.
Was there sorry, like a simulcast?
Well, I just switched to YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think it puts. Oh, yeah, but a lot of people just like get digital.
Yeah, the last,
Like, it'd be cool if you could like take a picture and then.
I feel lucky. If this one's here, because it's easier for me to get to.
Then I feel bad for all the
I'm starting to get used to it.
I've never taken them so far.
Very senior people.
I'm going to like normal variety, not during my day. I was in a plane. Traffic will clear out till 7 or 8 just to get across the bridge.
Oh yeah. Oh god. When I go down to like the AT&T building down there,
Really should know.
there's some things I really don't. Well, used to, but the traffic is done. To leave here at 4 o'clock. So I don't. And I hang around the Tyson's Mall for an hour because I know that would have a problem getting over the bridge.
Yeah,
Fortunately, they're done at 9 o'clock. And usually there's some traffic. But okay.
Free parking.
Terrible.
They post a lot of things. A lot of goodwill. I think they had no JS was there once. I was there for that. Forget the last time I was there, but yeah, it's so nice to park on there. This is Tyson's cabin.
Yeah, our graduate filled up.
Well,
Not very much.
Oh wow, okay.
Then they send you, well, if you're an employee or working there.
so I didn't catch up on the side of this, catch up with your pizza.
So they'll send you over to another building,
I didn't realize it was filling up that fast.
No, the new tower, it'll open up summer, it'll start moving in, and there's a big parking lot. Yeah, take off.
Yeah, now like the guy.
But I work for what kind of work do you do?
Fun. Right now, just the last 2 years I've been I used to work at Plastics and Slabs in Columbia, and yeah, that was a fun ride. Did you change one of the been doing websites. It's kind of accessory work. Yeah. Well, this is. Well, this, I really want to get into this at some time. I'm just wondering when I'll run across somebody that has a problem that I can actually help them solve. It's kind of what I
Alright everybody, I guess we're going to try to get started, get moving a little bit. There was, as usual with meetups, right, there was about 45 reservations, but you know, we've still got a good crowd. So we are waiting on one of our speakers. Thomas Cox is supposed to be coming here from the Block 1 team. He's supposed to be on his way. Might be caught in traffic or something. But I'm Dominic Thomas, and this is Brendan Espinoza. We're kind of co-hosting the event together. I'm with Werbly. I'm going to talk a little bit about my project. We're building on the Eos blockchain, but we're both heavily involved in governance in the Eos community, have been for the last several months. Brendan's going to give a little talk about governance and what we have going on there. So, how many people are familiar with Eos at all? Community, yeah. You like heard of it, or is anybody real active in the community, like Eos holders? Have you run across me in Telegram and decided I'm a jerk? No, good.
Yeah,
You just right, yeah. Well, I understand that. So Eos is due to launch here in this 2 days, right? The second.
Yeah, well, at least the snapshot on the
Right.
second, and then they initiate whatever process they're going to choose for launch. Can be done once the snapshot is verified. Does everyone understand what we mean by snapshot? No. Okay. So it's a lot of people got confused about EOS in the way that EOS had released some tokens on an Ethereum platform, but the whole idea is that they're going to be launching their own platform with their own tokens. How does this work? And there's still a bit of confusion there. So what Block One, who's the team that's writing the software, at least initially writing the software here, they did a 1 year long ICO. Are we familiar with the term ICOs? Good there. Okay. So they did a 1 year long ICO. They didn't have their own blockchain yet to release their own tokens, so they used the Ethereum blockchain, an ERC20 token. So probably 70–80% of those tokens that you see out there on CoinMarketCap and everything, those are all ERC20 tokens that are launched on the Ethereum platform. It's a really easy platform to launch these tokens on. So they did this to raise money to be able to build up a war chest for dApp development in the future. Okay, when we said that a snapshot is happening in 2 days, what that means is that people who are going to be future miners, or in the EOS world we call them block producers, people who are going to be future miners, they're running full Ethereum nodes right now. And at a certain time, at a certain moment, they're going to freeze their Ethereum node, and that'll be a record of consequence of all of the tokens, the EOS tokens that people hold. Okay. There was a registration process that we've had to go if we own EOS tokens on the Ethereum platform, where we register a new public key that is a EOS public key that will be available for us to use on the EOS platform. So the snapshot is going to be happening in 2 days.
Yeah.
At that point, they're going to verify that the snapshots they're using was taken at the right time, and that all the block producers have the same amount of information, or it's reflecting the same amount of information. Once that verification happens, then they're gonna spool up all of the wallets, those public keys, into this new Ethereum, or this new EOS blockchain. And once the blockchain is fully launched, we'll be able to access these new tokens kind of on a one-to-one relationship with what we had on the Ethereum network. At that point, the tokens on the Ethereum network, they don't disappear. They're there, but they're worthless at that point, right? So they're throwaway tokens. The token of value will be the token that's on the EOS platform.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I got airdropped Eos Dc. Are you
Okay.
familiar with this?
Yep.
So that's one of the block producers, right? So the block producers are the miners in the EOS chain. It's delegated proof of stake.
Okay.
So you've got proof of work, which is Bitcoin, famous, right? Litecoin, a lot of other proof of work coins. It's miners solving complex problems. They find the right hash, they get awarded a block, bam, there's the new Bitcoin, right? It's created. Proof of stake is when you just have them in your wallet. You know, they're sitting there, you're almost acting as like a node, and you're validating transactions, and you get slow rewards. Delegated proof of right. Delegated proof of stake is all these block producers, and Eos Dc is one of the block producers, and they decided instead of having individual ownership or whatever, they created a token, and they just airdropped it on the community. That was their kind of marketing. To
Will I
get
have
votes.
to register that token as well?
No.
Okay.
So when we say register, we're not actually registering our tokens, right? What we're doing is we're registering a Eos public address with our Ethereum wallet, right? And so any of the tokens, we're not actually registering the tokens, even though that's the language you'll see online. Is register your tokens, register your tokens. What's actually happening there is we're registering our new Eos wallet, or public key. I'm sorry, our new Eos public key on our on the Ethereum network. So to explain the Eos DAC thing just a little bit deeper. Eos DAC, like you were saying, they're one of the miners. They're spooling up, and all these miners have different ideas about how they should operate themselves. And with Eos, there's only 21 mining organizations that have a major role in verifying the transactions. So they get a good portion of the inflation every year. So there's a lot of jockeying to be elected one of those 21 block producers. Thank you. The Eos DAC token, that was kind of their marketing, their means of reaching out to the community and saying, hey, we're here. I am not 100% sure what the long run consequences of Eos DAC is going to be, because it does provide voting rights. There's some questions over whether it's actually a security or not. If you own the Eos DAC token, does that give you ownership of Eos DAC? There's a bit.
If they drop more EOS on you that they get from their rewards, is that a dividend, right? So
Yeah.
I think you're going to talk a little bit more about that, somewhat compliance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are some of the gray areas that exist in this world of blockchain today. Is what constitutes a security, what doesn't. There's all sorts of there's not even red tape yet. There's just big regulatory uncertainty.
There's just big
behind
lights,
it.
just big flashing lights.
Yeah.
And not a lot happening. The other thing about block producers to know is they do a lot more than validate transactions, right? They're providing the compute power for the network, bandwidth, right? So they're providing network resources, which is a little bit different. When we deploy our dApps, you're going to either need to stake tokens in a certain amount, depending on how much of the network resources you're going to need for your application, or you can lease them, which is another feature of the EOS token that some people aren't aware of. So I'm going to give a shout out to the Chintai leasing platforms. Some people were putting that together, but it's an example of the fact that EOS is entirely community built. Like even the wallets, Block One's not releasing a wallet. They're not releasing the governance. He and I are working on the worker proposal fund to create a proposal to send to all of you guys who are potentially EOS community members and token holders to vote on. It's all voluntary, so it's kind of a huge social experiment, as well as a bit of a blockchain departure too, because it's meant to be this sort of next iteration from something like Ethereum. But there's governance, and that's kind of, a lot of people have a problem with that with EOS, because we've got decentralized, Bitcoin, every man for themselves, woman, child, just mind your coins, and no one knows, I don't have to trust anybody, and I don't really have to talk to anybody, and I send Bitcoin and it's all good. Well, with EOS, there's going to be rules. We're going to decide what they are, but
By we, what we mean is us as token holders, as a community, are going to decide what the rules are for the public network, or networks should more than one emerge.
I know of at least one more.
Yeah. So what's very interesting is we all have these tokens, right? And Block One, in a few days, is going to be releasing the software open source. Anybody can spool up their own EOS network if they want to, with their own block producers. As a matter of fact, it's something that your business model, and I know you're going to talk about that today. Where was I going with this?
Block producers, independent chains, governance.
Yeah.
It's up to us to decide.
Yeah. Sorry guys, I totally lost my train of thought there. Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, so I heard that there's actually a couple of different chains launching, I guess, because EOS Canada had like their own EOS BIOS tool, and then there was also one in China as well. And I was wondering what the status is, or if there's maybe a third one that's also launching.
Well, we could speak to the fact that that's been resolved. A bunch of us block producers decided we were only going to launch one chain, and so everybody sort of scattered in Telegram and went through this process. And basically, all of the major block producers I'm aware of have all said, "Okay, no, we're not going to do two different things. Let's just hash it out, and let's go with this direction." So there's only one chain. The bulk of them. That doesn't mean that there aren't some other people. We are going to launch an independent chain for our project, and I'll explain why we're going to do that. We're not going to do it right now. We'll do it a little bit, probably in a few months, but There could be, well, what's that other startup? They're launching their own chain too.
Evolution.
Evolution.
So they want different governance,
Yeah.
right? But the cool thing is that Block One hoped for this. They weren't ever saying there'll only be one main chain, there'll only be one public chain. We don't want anything else, you know, it's kinda gonna be which chain do people wanna be a part of and has consensus, and there can be multiple consensuses.
And anybody who launches their own chain, they can choose whether to honor the coin drop or not, or to honor the snapshot or not, right? They can choose a totally alternative distribution method if they want for the coins and everything. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. However, I think that there's a solid consensus forming around honoring the snapshot and moving forward. That was why. Do you remember how many times have you guys heard EOS is a scam? I mean, so many times, right? This is why there was such ambiguity in the language. Actually, it wasn't ambiguity. It was very direct that the tokens we were buying don't guarantee anything, right? So it's up to the block producers whether they're going to honor the snapshot that's going to be taken in a couple days or not.
So yeah,
All
theoretically,
fairness, every token, every coin is a scam. At some point or another.
Back in 2015, Ethereum was called a scam as well,
Yeah.
so it's basically, I mean, any new innovative
Yeah,
project
that's right.
has.
right. Well, and the funny thing is we want decentralized, we want all these things, but then it's a scam because there's no one to back it, right? I mean, it's kind of part of what comes with the turf, is if you start something up from scratch, you have to create legitimacy. Because you don't have some governing body that you can run to for recourse, you know? And blockchain decentralization has its pluses and minuses, and we're learning, for those of us involved in EOS governance, that there's always drawbacks, you know, as we start to go through and think through a process like for a worker proposal fund that Brandon and I are a part of, you know, how do we make it as simple as possible, right? Everybody wants to make it simple and easy, but then you go, well, what about this edge case? And what about someone who does this, you know? And then you start realizing, at least getting a little bit of that pain that governments feel in how do you not legislate something to death so that there's room and it's not a bureaucratic nightmare, but then how do you account for people taking advantage, because in blockchain, everybody's gonna attack your weaknesses. I mean, they just are, we know that's the truth, so.
Yeah, you had a question here.
So two things. One, is there ever going to be, for example, like I think with Ethereum, the rumors have always been is there is a max of the max number of Ethereum that can be mined. You just haven't determined it. With EOS, is it the same thing at some point, or are you guys gonna say?
Well, it's fixed in the code right now, 5% a year. So the rate of inflation is hard capped, right? The ultimate number of coins is not. Okay, and the reason why is because with it being proof of stake, the only way for miners to make money, they're not mining new coins, right? The only way for them to make money is for them to receive new coins out of the blue. They're rather than it being proof of work where they're earning a new coin, they're simply verifying transactions. That's all they do. That's why it's way less energy intensive to do distributed proof of stake. But in order for proof of stake to work, it has to be an inflationary model. It's one of the reasons why governance is important, because an inflationary currency, in theory, loses value over time, right? So we want to make sure that the community has the ability to choose to burn the coins, any extra coins that aren't allocated to the block producers themselves.
Or that are just, you know, in circulation. That's a worker proposal, right, in the system, where as a community member, you could just say, God, EOS price is down to $1, you know, we're producing 25 million new coins a year, it's been 4 or 5 years, we're up and above 600 million, I'm calling for a 100 million coin burn. Let's go back to our baseline again so this doesn't get out of control. And if it gets voted on with enough momentum from the community and enough votes from the community, 100 million coin burn, you know, so we can control that too.
You have
And
a second?
also, right, so the second question was, I think a lot of crypto projects, this isn't me hating on EOS or anything, but a lot of crypto projects, a lot of what bites them in the ass in the long run is always lack of communication. And the thing is, unfortunately, I would also put EOS on the end of one of those projects where there are a couple of things where it just made you shrug. Like, why was it last year the ICO, they said it was going to end at the end of June, and magically it went up to the end of May at some point. I mean, I could be completely wrong with what I'm saying. Like, to the best of my knowledge, it was originally
You started
ended
last June, right? Or
Yeah, it's been a year long.
Yeah.
And real quick too, we don't work for EOS, just we like EOS, I own EOS, you know, I'm obviously using the chain to build a project on. But I think what's interesting about it, and I agree with you, there's a lot of blockchain projects that aren't very good at managing their communities or talking much, but in Block One's defense, a little bit of my understanding of it is that this really was always supposed to be about the community kind of taking the lead 100%. They are extremely mindful of not being involved much. I mean, Dan Larimer's around, you can, you know, talk to him or whatever, but, you know, they have to be really mindful of the fact that this is an open source software that anybody can use, and you know, they're between a rock and a hard place with a lot of the compliance that we were talking about. Is that if they talk too much and they start pushing it too much, then all of a sudden the SEC is knocking on the door and saying, this doesn't look open source to us. You know, why are you talking to all these people? Are these your customers? Are these your investors? You know, so it's a fine line. I agree with you. There could be better communication in any project, but
As far as the code development is concerned, there has been very robust communication going on among any of the developers that wanted to insert themselves into the project. I don't know, have you perused the code at all on GitHub and looked at how many pull requests have been?
I think I've seen, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
trying to miss.
So it's one of the most active GitHub repositories that there is right now. So there's been, as far as the development is concerned, there's been a whole lot of communication there. As far as the other stuff, the problem is there is no central organization, right? So this is one of the problems of decentralized blockchain, right, or decentralized communities, is that there is no guy, there is no ultimate clearinghouse, there's no authority that says all the communication is going to go through us. It's a problem, and it's something that the community's got to figure out. Maybe you can figure it out. Maybe you can figure out that clearinghouse for conversations. EOS Go is doing a pretty good job of being a clearinghouse. So there's a guy in Raleigh. Was he a dentist? I think he was a dentist.
I don't know his background.
Yeah. He started this organization, EOS Go, and he's pretty much the clearinghouse for information. A lot of the announcements now are going through him. They run a podcast as well. They just did a really robust series of podcasts where they tried to interview as many of the block producer candidates as possible. So we're getting there. The community's getting there, but it's an issue of people standing up and deciding that they want to add value in a certain area. But to your point, you're right. The communication is hard, and the reason why is there's no official central clearinghouse like there would be if Apple was releasing a blockchain or something like that, right?
Right, and I think what really worried me, I think a lot of people, was the fact that when a lot of the mining organizations were announcing the about the block producers, right, the price was pumped up, but then it just sort of went quiet while on the news. I mean, I could be completely wrong about this, but it wasn't, people were sort of like, when exactly, like, did the elections end or whatnot?
Well, they haven't happened.
They haven't happened yet.
Yeah, I don't even,
Right.
like, it's something that, like a lot of people don't even, we're just wondering in our heads, like.
I had a question for you guys about that too.
Okay.
So there's like 100 block producers now, right?
Well, there's none yet.
There's none.
Right.
There's a bunch of us as candidates.
Like
launching
ESCO
that.
has like 130 on their
Right,
list
yeah.
or something. How did the first, so on the first block, how do we know who the first 21 are if we don't get the governance until June the 2nd or 3rd?
That is a question for the block producers to figure out of who's going to volunteer, who's going to step up and say we'll be the initial block producers. you can talk a little bit, you were just talking to me about some of the hard decisions that are being made right now about the proper methodology of launching the network.
Isn't there a voting round that happens, I mean, once the blockchain goes live?
Yes.
I mean, so that's.
Very quickly thereafter.
Yeah.
But that's a big step, right? Once the
Yeah.
blockchain goes live, because there's a bunch of different voices on trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. And everybody, you have to understand, everybody wants to be elected as a block producer, right? So everybody's shouting, everybody's banging their chest, everybody's saying, let me lead this project, let me do this, let me do it. And so, it's interesting to watch because nobody's willing to step back and say, yeah, let him be the first, and then we'll go in after that, right? And rather than build out the networks one block producer at a time, bring them on board, they're trying to harmonize it and do it all together. It's difficult.
So that was the part we spoke about at the beginning, that there's at least been consensus amongst block producers that we're gonna launch one main chain. We're not gonna launch multiple chains. There's the BIOS from Eos Canada that I think most people are signing on to use, and then now developing and working. So it's a human experiment. I mean, right? There's always politics, and that's, you know, the community starts off like 3 or 4 months ago. You're in the East telegrams, everybody's just high-fiving, all the block producers are friends. You know, everybody just wants to launch this chain, and it's, you know, it's a big kumbaya song. And then now there's competition. You know, when we announced as a block producer, I think there were 40. You know, and it was like, oh, cool, we're dropping 21 spots. Like, you know, we'll be all right. And now, as you're saying, I believe it's got to be every day there's like 10 or something that seem to launch. So I imagine we're well over the 150 mark at this point. And that's just, you know, everybody who's signing up on EOS Go, which is really the only go-to we have to make ourselves visible for the most part. But there's other people who can launch at any time. So the voting's rolling. You know, that's the other thing they did. So you have to keep voting for your favorite block producer on an ongoing basis. What's the decay? Like a couple days?
I believe it's 3 days. So the
3 days.
Yeah, the voting is 3 days. So
Right.
the tokens get locked up for 3 days.
No, they're doing that because they're trying not to just get people entrenched. They want block producers to compete. You should need to compete ongoing to maintain your spot, assuming that you're providing the best service to the community. But you know, again, another just judgment call. Is that going to work? Is there going to be voter apathy? We talk about this all the time. Like, how many people are actually going to vote? And when they do, how many people are going to actually do any research? I mean, is anybody in this room interested in researching 151 block producers to find out who's the best? Who your top 30 is?
And what tools can we trust to vote with?
Yeah.
Right, that's
How do you know
another
you have
thing.
good information? I'm going to tell you tonight that Worbley's great. You should probably vote for us, but you're just going to say, I don't know, that guy's a jerk. I don't want to vote for them. Or you'll say, yeah, okay, I know that guy, and you'll vote for Worbley. But and so we're making more of these too. I mean, there are a lot of people creating tools for auditing, transparency. So it's probably going to be a little rocky for the first 3 to 6 months. But the ecosystem is very well thought out in my experience, and there's a lot of ways for people to have influence. So it's a trade-off.
And I'm fully anticipating there being some bumps in this launch process. Right, there's a lot of hurdles to get over. The block producers first have to get through that verification process and make sure that the snapshot that they took is the right snapshot, and they're all on board with using the same snapshot. That alone is going to take a while. It could be quick, or it could take quite a bit longer than we're anticipating. You know, it could take a couple hours, it could take a few days. We'll see how that goes. Like we said, there's the politics involved. One thing to keep in mind is that a failure to have a functioning chain, EOS chain, on the 3rd of June is not a failure of the project, right, at all. There's these bumps that are going to have to go over, that they're going to have to get over. As a matter of fact, solving the problems and getting over these bumps only makes the chain stronger once it's launched, right? So if there's going to be some hiccups, we'd like to have those hiccups early, and we'd like the block producers to be able to work through that. I am fully anticipating there being some hiccups. I'm fully anticipating there being a lot of FUD about EOS and how it's a failure, and see, I told you it was a scam. But you know, we've been working pretty heavily now with these block producers, and they're serious. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Is this format right now where we're waiting for Thomas working okay? Is it Q&A?
Yeah, I got a question. You guys are actually using EOS like in testnet right now?
Yes. Oh, oh my God. There's at at least 6 or 7 test nets I'm aware of.
I didn't have a chance to like tinker with the.
I can give you some Telegram channels you can get into if you wanted to run a node and
I think I'm
around.
on one, but one question, like, have you tried testing out like the TPS, like the transactions per second? Is it anywhere?
Yeah, they've done some tests. I don't remember the data from the recent one. I thought I saw something around 600.
Yeah, I think that's what I saw
But
too.
I know it scales to millions.
Yeah, the reason why is because they can scale multiple chains, and the chains use the same token, right? So part of the technology is our token, the EOS token that we have, can jump from chain to chain. So even if one chain reaches maximum capacity, it's not an issue of bringing more block producers on board into that chain. It's an issue of launching another chain.
So that's the idea, that there would be multiple side chains, and they could have specialties, they could have different governance, but again, it would be the same token.
Okay.
So why don't I
If
get,
they choose to honor the token, you know.
Another question that's kind of saggy, like, just the contracts, are those like embedded in the chain themselves, or do they kind of decouple them from the actual chain?
smart contracts?
Yeah.
I can't get that technical, I don't go that deep. I don't know enough about it.
I guess I don't understand the question itself.
Well, like Ethereum, they will take a smart contract, compile it down to machine language, and then embed that actually into one of the blocks themselves.
Okay.
So you're actually limited in size of like how much source code you put in there.
Oh, there is
That-
something about that, I don't know exactly
It
how it goes,
actually-
it is a little different than
Dan
Ethereum.
I do
Hammer
know
really
blocks
called
are-
that out about Ethereum doing
Yeah.
a good job because
They're doing it differently, I know that,
Yeah.
in C++ and WASM, and, he really thought through a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff, and it was meant to be a better Ethereum, I mean, it really is, without being an attack on Vitalik or anything like that.
no.
And
I
by the way,
love Ethereum, but like, when you
Sure.
really look at the technical, the architecture.
I mean, they changed
It was a
the
first
game,
draft.
I
Yeah.
mean, everybody's building off of that tech in some capacity at this point.
even
so.
Bitcoin.
So you know how you guys said earlier about like registering your tokens? So you put in your public key of Ethereum, and you
Well, you
get
generate one, right?
You
have to go
generate
through that process with your ERC20 token, use the tool, generate a public
you
EOS
generate a
address,
public EOS token.
right,
I mean
and a
public,
private key.
yeah, a public key. Can you modify the public key?
No, I don't think so. Because that's what you're gonna need to redeem your tokens after the
You can
snapshot.
register a new public key, but like,
Yeah, you can do it again,
Yeah.
but just make sure you get the new private key with it. Whichever your last registration public key is the one that's gonna
And
count.
make sure you do it tonight.
Change all this.
I already set it up,
Okay,
I set
okay.
it up for him. You
Are there other
No,
safe
no.
ways to generate your private key other than the EOS.io website? Like something about just having a website
I
display plain
understand,
text.
not that I'm
Yeah,
aware of.
yeah, you can download the EOS software for it and run it from your own
Okay,
system.
so you think you can do a command line within those?
Oh,
You can.
okay, I think, okay, now I know the question he's asking. So, the question he's asking is not, account generated names. So he's asking if you can change the public key to like a user readable account name, cause he
Oh,
knows
no, you
that's.
can do that with scatter when you register, right? When you register your ID.
Yeah,
That's
so
different.
there's still, I don't know where block one ended up. I know that it was gonna be like a 12 digit max or something like that on the.
Yeah, you're gonna have like an account name, because you're gonna have an account,
Yeah.
you're eventually gonna have an EOS login, and again, they're probably not gonna build out that tool, but everybody will be able to use that tool in their dApps. It's built into because there's account recovery, that's really the big innovation in EOS, is that you can have a flesh and blood person that can help you recover your account if you lose your private keys. There's still recovery, there's no other blockchain I'm aware of where you can do that. And you designate somebody like a trustee, a person you know, so that if you screw everything up, you can recover your account.
But they can't recover without you,
Right.
so kind of two-factor authentication.
You have to do a pinky swear and a special dance. But there's a process, and it's very cool. Let me launch into this. Thomas is on his way, we've heard, so he'll eventually be here. I'll start by talking about our project a little bit. So we got into this a little about what are the different use cases for EOS. So our project's Warbly. We are building a fintech compliant blockchain, and we're using EOS to do it. We will be launching an independent chain. You will not get Warbly tokens because you registered your EOS ERC20. These aren't going to drop into your wallet. We are going to do an airdrop on the EOS community because we're part of the EOS community and we want everybody to participate in our project. And and have an opportunity to engage with our network. But it is a completely independent chain. We'll be launching it just like the EOS blockchain now. So my CTO has been part of the launch because we are also a block producer candidate. We wanted to help launch the main chain, learn a little bit about launching our own. And when we launch our blockchain, we'll have our own block producers and we'll have our own unique token. So it's one of the enterprise use cases, and one of the main reasons, well, the main reason that we're doing it is we're going to be launching a bank, and we have a partner who's launching a trading platform, and we need global compliance, right? We're not going to be able to have a full bank and provide all the banking services if we can't meet global AML, KYC, all that stuff.
Blockchain innovations are disrupting a vast array of industries. Your industry could be next, and not all businesses are going to be able to adapt. Is your business ready? You may have good developers. You may even have a killer app up your sleeve. But blockchain solutions require infrastructure, and lots of it. Costs can quickly get out of hand, and that just for testing. How about your users? Converting fiat to crypto, dealing with exchanges, managing wallets and private keys. Each step they take on the path to your solution is riddled with risks and complexity. Users need simplicity and ease of use. Worbly has you covered. An enterprise blockchain platform that seamlessly brings together users, developers, and businesses. Worbly provides a fully programmable blockchain ecosystem for developers to build and deploy their dApps. Layers of pre-programmed functionality built on the EOS blockchain framework provide developers with a frictionless digital playground, along with intuitive user interfaces. There is no need to build out mining and network infrastructure. Simply pay for computing power, data storage, and bandwidth as you need it, cost-effectively, all powered with the Worbly token. Worbly provides seamless user participation. Your users get a globally compliant, full-service financial hub for all their cryptocurrency needs, along with traditional banking services and offerings that they are used to, such as funds transfers, checking and savings accounts, wire peer-to-peer, payment processing, debit cards, and more. With a single account, your users can store, buy, and trade their digital assets. They can fund their account, immediately trade and exchange any cryptocurrency, interact with your dApps, and can withdraw back into fiat at any time. Worbly is not just building a community of developers and users, we are building an economy. Visit worbly.io to sign up and find out more.
The project is primarily run by the Worbly Foundation, so that's essentially what I work for at this point. The Worbly Foundation is going to launch the Worbly Network, which will be an independent EOS chain. And then our first major dApp is going to be the financial services platform, which is the integrated digital currency bank. And then QubitX is our trading platform partner. They're launching a cryptocurrency exchange. We're going to offer all of the banking services, as it was talked about in the video: bill pay, checking, savings, debit cards. We're going to have full banking license in every region or every jurisdiction that we launch in. The idea is that we know that there's going to be enterprise use cases, there's going to be various fintech products, and they all need fiat gateways, right? Everybody's struggling with this problem to some degree. We have people like Coinbase that are doing it in the United States, but in a lot of areas it's difficult. So we're looking to target, all sorts of various cryptocurrency users, but specifically the unbanked and underbanked are a big part of the project, because we know we can provide these services a lot cheaper by leveraging blockchain technology and the digital currency payments and the integration with the trading platform. So this is our team. I'm Dominic, I'm the CEO. Rob is our CTO. He's worked with Sony Music. He's right now launching the EOS blockchain as we speak and working with the team there. Laura is our CMO, and Craig's our chairman. Jeff's in the back. He's one of our founders, but we're putting together a really big team of people to help us get through the legal and compliance. We have people from Wells Fargo, GE Capital. Eric is the CEO of the QubitX trading platform. They have a global team, and so we know that it's going to take a lot of people to get this this launched and to get through all of the compliance.
Do you think, with your platform, do you think you'll ever be able to do things directly into fiat?
Absolutely, we'll have banking licenses.
In the sense that, like, for example, seller's verification imaging is just it's not really a direct thing, they're doing an exchange thing behind the scenes that gets you the fiat. You think you guys can actually get to it?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
point of
right.
having banking licenses, like, right? Part of our strategy is buying a US bank that's nationally chartered, has Federal Reserve settlement, so we don't require correspondent banking, and we have direct Federal Reserve settlement with our SWIFT service at the end of every business day, right?
Yeah.
So, direct fiat, that's exactly what we're going for, I agree with you.
And even the debit cards, credit cards, they're not the graphic cards that
No,
we have.
issued by Visa, I agree. Most of the projects are offering you basically prepaid cards. It's not really a true bank account, right? So that's why we're going all the way with the banking licenses. We've identified the process right now for the users that you start out, and I don't know how many people have tried to explain buying and selling cryptocurrency to their friends. It's kind of a joke, right? You know, you have to basically sit there and pretty much either be on the phone the entire time or do a screenshot, right? So in the US, we have Coinbase. It's wire money to Coinbase. Then it's buy Bitcoin. And then if you want to get any altcoins, you've got to send the Bitcoin to a trading platform. Then you have to buy that currency. And if you're smart all along the way, at some point in that journey, you're downloading everything to a wallet on your desktop where you're now responsible for your public and private key, your private keys. And if you lose any of that along the way, or you put in the wrong address, good luck. Maybe you send me some Bitcoin, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll have an extra Bitcoin. Unlikely that you're going to find a random address, but it's at least 6 steps in, and it's usually 5 steps to sell the way we've identified the process. It can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on account verification for a first timer, how long it takes for your funds to transfer in, and it's about 10% fees when you finish that journey, depending on how you do it. It can be done a little bit cheaper, but it's pretty expensive for the average user. So we want to provide a solution for the digital currency industry. For example, it took us 3 months just to get a bank account, and we're not even dealing with cryptocurrency yet. Just because we have blockchain in our articles of incorporation, it took us 3 months to get a bank account in the United States. So we know that it meets a need not only in the cryptocurrency community for businesses and startups, but for individual users. And the idea behind building a network is that it'll meet regulatory compliance. So the reason why we're not using a public blockchain, which would have been way easier for us and a lot more popular, is that a public blockchain can't necessarily meet all of the compliance standards. Like, we can't go to the EOS community right now and say, oh, by the way, we need every block producer to submit to an audit for us monthly, so we can make sure they have proper security practices and that they're storing user data properly, that they're verifying all of the users on the network properly, and we're going to put everybody in EOS through our AML KYC procedure. By the way, that's not going to work in a public chain. So we didn't want to do the walled garden, right? The completely private chain. Anybody can build our network. You want to deploy a DApp, you don't have to ask me. It's in all of our code base and everything. I mean, we'll be mostly using the EOS code base for the blockchain, but if you want to deploy a DApp on the network, everything will be available to you. There's no sign up process or sign on process with us. We're going to make it available to anybody who wants to do so. I mean, I think you'd probably want to contact us because we'd love to help you launch your application, but you don't have to. It's just an independent chain. We're also a block producer, as we talked about earlier. We wanted to support the main chain, and we believe that with the standards that we have to set for ourselves in launching the independent chain and meeting all the compliance standards, transparency, auditing, those sorts of things, that we feel that we're a decent candidate. So we do hope that you'll vote for us, and we plan on taking the bulk of our earnings from our block producer and putting them into an open source development fund. What we mean by that is we're actually just going to fund an open source team. We're not going to tell them what to build. We're not going to be involved at all. We just thought it would be cool if there was an open source team building apps on the EOS network. They could just be paid to come up with whatever they want to, and continue to build applications, because they'll work on our chain and they'll work on the EOS main chain. So this is our token, just a little bit about how it works. We're going to be using it for transactions on the financial services platform. does have the same qualities as an EOS token. There'll be leasing. You'll need it to stake for resources if you're deploying your DApp. And it'll also be a unit of transaction. We're only launching 500 million in our token economics. We thought that was plenty. There will be inflation, but we intend to limit it and to do a coin burn on a fairly regular basis so that we don't have runaway inflation. We are in the middle of a sale right now, if anybody's interested. We are only doing private investors and institutional investors or accredited investors because of United States security laws, but we hope to have a public sale after we launch the platform.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand how the financial services fits in with the blockchain. So is the financial services platform that you guys already have, that you have constructed, does that run on the blockchain? So is it kind of like a DApp, or is it they're just two separate entities? And if they are two separate, what does the EOS blockchain actually do then?
Right. No, it'll run on the blockchain. So we'll be hosting the DApp on the blockchain. We'll be recording all of the transactions. We're building auditing tools because the financial institution will be ultimately owned by the foundation, which is therefore owned by the token holders. So our governance model is that token holders will be voting for our board of the foundation, and then the executive team of the foundation will answer to the board. So I'm a founder, but I have a 2-year limited term, and then I have to be reelected. So I could be fired from my own project in 2 years. You know.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
But the bank will be hosted. That's why, again, why we chose EOS, because we can put everything on the blockchain. We can host the application, every transaction.
So will this allow you to take your EOS coins and then use them on like a Visa debit card? Is that part of the goal?
No, our bank will be just full service. You'll be able to buy any tokens you want. You'll have to pay in Warbly tokens for our transaction fees because we're going to eat our own dog food, so to speak.
Probably
We're gonna accept-
or Binance coins, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to accept our token for the transaction fees. But that'll all happen in the back end. You won't even necessarily need any in your wallet. If you want to pay your fees in USD, we'll be converting them all in the back end into Warbly tokens for your transaction fees. But we'll have the integration with the QubitX trading platform. So you're going to have one UX. And so it's going to be your deposits, both your fiat deposits, savings accounts, checking accounts, whatever, all of your balances for your cryptocurrency, your services, bill pay, all of that stuff,
So
loans.
banking services tied into an exchange as well?
Yes, and
Okay.
the exchange will be directly integrated through QubitX. We don't own or run the exchange, but we're building together as strategic partners. So you'll have quick buy, sell Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and then they're going to hold, ERC20 tokens. They'll have a whole host of digital assets available.
So who
in
will
the
be
platform.
running the nodes? Who will be running the nodes? Who will be running the nodes?
The block producers. So we'll start by running the first few, and then we'll hold elections on our chain too for block producers. We're just going to have different standards that they'll have to meet. So they'll have to go through, like I was saying, auditing processes. They'll have to meet all of the compliance standards to be a block producer. So we'll more than likely end up with some block producers from the EOS main chain, and then for the most part, people who deploy dApps on our network, we expect to be block producers. One other account too is we're going to be offering insurance on your digital currency deposits, so you don't need to download wallets if you don't want to. We're very confident in our security procedures, so we're going to be hosting full nodes of almost every currency, so that you don't need wallets whatsoever. The whole idea is to make this extremely easy to use.
A similar concept like Corda? Is it like
Corda? Well,
Uh-huh.
Corda is a permission blockchain, right?
Yeah.
So they're a little bit different. You can't just anyone deploy a dApp there, is my understanding. You have to go through, their process. It's sort of enterprise.
So they're creating like consortium of the different bank. They have like a consortium
Yeah,
of about
yeah.
100 banks.
Yeah, oh, they're definitely, they're working with banks too. I think ours is just a little bit more of a people's bank. It's effectively gonna be owned by the community because the foundation will own the bank. I'm not gonna own the bank. I'll just be a token holder like everybody else. We're only keeping 4% of the 500 million for founders, so.
So a couple questions, because you mentioned in the beginning that you would be doing an airdrop for EOS token holders,
Yeah.
correct? Okay,
So right now we have 5 million allocated for that.
I see, so that's.
We'll use the snapshot.
Is that one-to-one, what would it be once, would it be once something?
It's just however many
Exactly.
addresses.
Yeah.
5 million divided by however many addresses.
Okay, second question is, you say that you want to be a block producer on the Eos main chain, but you're running a side chain.
So we can be block producers for both.
Okay, interesting.
We'll actually be launching 3 block producers to get our chain off the ground.
Okay.
That'll be run by the foundation, and then CubitX is going to be launching a block producer, and then I've been in discussion with all the other block producers on the main chain, and we'll see
I see.
who might make sense
What
to
is the
come over.
time frame for this platform that you'll be launching?
Where's the what?
What kind of a time frame they're talking about?
So right now, we're working on our MVP. We're hoping to have that ready August 1st. And then we are currently talking to the country of Zimbabwe to launch the product there as our test case, September 1st.
So actually I'm from India. Actually we are developing at least 3 fintech applications
Oh, cool.
on the EOS.
We're hoping to launch the network around the same time we launch the MVP, so around August 1st. Again, somewhat depending on how quickly we need that software to be really stable. So, we're kind of waiting to see how that goes.
I'm curious as to why why aren't you guys running Warbly on the Eos main chain?
That's what I said at the beginning. It's a public chain. We can't control the compliance.
I see.
We would have to set the standards for every EOS account holder to go through our AML KYC process, for
Okay.
example.
Then why are you
We'd have every block producer would have to answer to us as far as standards, right? We don't feel like
So why are you running an ICO?
fundraising, right? To launch the product.
Okay, do you have an MVP?
We're working on the MVP now through private sale contributions that we've raised so far.
Got it.
Oh, okay, alright. My bad. So with all the requirements needed, they keep mentioning Coinbase and fiat transparency. Are requirements that are needed for Coinbase, like social security identification, what would Warbly do to make that easier, to make making an account or actually transferring fiat into crypto easier?
I don't think we'll make the account process easier. If anything, it might actually be a little bit more robust because we're going to have to meet the full suite of compliance standards for banking in whatever region we deploy in. Some will be more stringent than others. The United States and Europe clearly with usually the highest standards. But as far as the conversion, what will make it easier is the platform is right there with your bank account. And they're directly integrated because we have a relationship with the trading platform partner that their trading engine and our core banking engine are going to be directly integrated at an API layer.
And second question is, why Zimbabwe the test case study?
Zimbabwe.
Because we looked at different regions that we wanted to deploy in and looked at the resources between the 2 teams, and frankly, we have really good contacts there.
No, actually the Zimbabwe.
I'm going to Zimbabwe June 10th.
Zimbabwe had a very large inflation in the last couple of years, and in fact their own currency is actually almost gone down the drain. So a lot of people are actually accepting the the other currencies, and there is already one service running in Zimbabwe, and which actually accepts the Bitcoin, and they actually have a connection with a Japanese firm because in Japan Bitcoin is considered an official currency. So they do actually the reverse conversion from there, and then get paid to the importer and export in Zimbabwe.
You may have brought this up, but what's the utility of the token? What the use case of the token, I should say?
Well, again, so it's going to be used for transacting on the network, and it's pretty much the same use case as the EOS token. It represents network resources, all that stuff. Well, almost all the same properties.
Okay.
Is there an incentive for developers to come on Wobbly platform? Is there an incentive for somebody to build some of the application?
Well, I think part of it is that the compliance should be handled for you for the most part as far as the blockchain, and that the foundation will be setting up a business development team for dApps on the network. We'll be able to offer you a bank account. We'll be able to offer you a token listing, because you'll be able to launch your own token on our network too. EOS is going to have, much like the ERC20 on Ethereum, we can launch a side chain on our platform for you, so you can have a unique token. So those are some of the reasons. We'll also hopefully have funding available, and we'll have a process to apply for that as well.
So, because of money laundering laws, do you think it's possible for verbal.
Verbally.
Okay.
Verbally.
Is it even possible? Do you guys think it's possible that verbally can speed up transactions between accounts, or do you think? Again, I'm asking this because how do I say this? I think like PayPal is like the perfect example. Like most people don't realize when PayPal came around the first time around, they weren't as they're not as evil as people think they are. They actually didn't want to close people's accounts and everything.
Right.
But then the government came and said, no, you actually have to check people's accounts, and they just weren't good at it, and it just fell apart, and nobody.
Right, oh, I see what you're saying, right? So no matter what your processes are, the potential for government intervention to close user accounts because for whatever reason they believe that there's possible illicit activity. And you're asking, do we think we can protect against that?
No, like, what I'm saying is, examples right now, like the banks came up with Zelle. Again, the reason why Zelle doesn't work really well is because, like how I said, do you guys think that you can beat banks?
Well,
Like,
we think we can beat them on fees,
speed-
we think we can beat them on,
speed-wise, or do you think it's
right, peer-to-peer transfer, because we can transfer digital currency and provide the fiat conversion through our correspondent banking network across regions. So at first it won't be quite as easy because in Zimbabwe, peer-to-peer will be simple. If you have users that have an account within our platform, that'll be very easy, obviously. If you have somebody in another bank, then we're gonna have to, bank to bank, do the correspondent banking conversion and the account settlement on the back end. But we still think we can make it cheaper because of the use of cryptocurrency and the use of a complete, online platform and all of the other reduced fees and overhead, that any online bank would have. But when you're kind of talking about a straight, like USD wire transfer from, the United States to a user that doesn't have an account with us, will we be able to make that much cheaper? Not for the user on the other end, but for you, we will. Whatever their fees are, we won't be able to control.
That's because you guys still have to use SWIFT network for those interbank transfers, right?
Exactly.
So, will there be delegates on the Warbly blockchain as well? Because you said it's it's a side chain. So we'll have.
Well, it's an independent chain.
It's
Right.
independent chain.
So we'll have our own governance.
Okay.
So
have you guys decided on how many delegates would be on the Warbly chain? So EOS has 21, 100 or
Well, no,
so,
they're
so
block
141.
producers. That's a little different. I was
I thought-
talking about community governance. Block producers.
Oh yeah, that's what I
right.
meant. So I said
So
block.
delegated proof of stake is
a consensus
term, but-
algorithm. Yeah, it's a consensus
Right.
algorithm.
So block producers, yes, we will have our own block producers.
So have you guys set on the amount? Because right now EOS has 21 and 100 reserves, so that makes it.
Oh, exactly
21.
how many are we
So
gonna
yeah, so
have?
how many would you guys have and how are?
We haven't entirely set that number yet. We know that we can get it done and feel relatively secure with 3 if we're controlling them, because again, it's a little different.
That makes it really.
Part of why
centralized.
EOS is having all of the block producers is because it's a completely free-for-all system, that has to, we can coordinate our block
That
producers,
makes
is what
it
I'm saying.
That makes it closer to a permission chain, because if there's only 3 super nodes protecting the network. If 2 of those go down, the network is destroyed.
Right.
So you would want more than 3.
No, of course we will, but we're saying we feel confident at launch that we can get it done with 3.
Okay.
You have to imagine banks are on 1, right? Their server system.
I mean, yeah, but those are permission.
They're on 1, right?
It's all in how you look at it. I mean,
Right.
it's just an interesting concept to run 3 super nodes, but it could work.
I'm going to let Brandon talk so we don't run out of time and we have time for the next group. Thank you guys. Brandon, do you have to?
No, I don't have any slides or anything. I have one other question for you though.
This presentation? Do you share this presentation? Can you share this?
Oh, the slides from it? Yeah,
Huh?
sure. I can do it through the
I'll
page or something.
give my card.
Sure. Yeah.
I have one other question for you though. I know that there were some rumors about Coinbase becoming a bank. Are you guys keeping your pulse on that? Is that true, or is it just?
I don't have any inside track to Coinbase. My understanding is that they took a look at it
And that may not be a bad thing either, right? Because they could be
we
pioneering.
hope to launch multiple banks on our platform. We do not want to be the only bank. So part of our pitch is to eventually go to some of the incumbents and offer them the opportunity to launch a digital branch. We don't want to be the only bank. We don't think there should be multiple. So
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, guys, my name is Brandon Espinoza. I am just a guy. I'm not affiliated with any organization. I own a little bit of Eos. I'm by no means a whale. Wish I was. My background is I am a risk governance and compliance professional in the finance industry. Specifically, what I do is I design, develop, and deploy anti-money laundering related training to banks and other financial institutions to help them with their compliance obligations, their regulatory obligations that they have. That's my background as far as professionally is concerned. As I started a few months ago really diving into what EOS was and starting to dip my toe in the governance discussions that were there, I realized that it was something that I really wanted to become involved with. So, more than just dipping my toe, I decided to do a cannonball into the deep end and really start doing a lot of working with some of the key individuals that are driving a lot of the discussion that's there. So one of the cool things, we've talked about this being a community that's driven by the users themselves. And I'm evidence of that, right? I have no affiliation. I don't even have a project that I'm running, right? But I'm very much excited about the prospects of this platform. Really quickly, a lot of what I was going to share today, we've already kind of talked about in the little Q&A session at the beginning, but I do want to dive into a little bit more in depth. I do want to find out about you guys first, though. I know that we were having some discussions about where people came in from and how far away. I want to know who came in the farthest away. I have my suspicion who is the farthest from home. Okay? If you were from 10 miles away or farther, raise your hand. Okay? 25? 50? 100 miles away.
If you consider that I'm just visiting US, I'm from India, then I live in the farthest.
So are you just visiting, or do you live here now?
I'm just visiting. And
so we may have a contender. I think we have a contender here. But for the rest of us that aren't from India, I know I'm about 300 miles away. I came in from North Carolina today.
Wow.
And then
2,500.
Wow.
2,500. By the way, everybody, this is Thomas Cox. He has finally made it. A little bit of traffic out there.
3.5 hour flight delay, and then, traffic here. From Dulles.
Well, I will keep my remarks short so that you're able to deliver what it is that you wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about a little bit about my perspective on this governance, on these governance discussions that we've been having, and why I'm so passionate about the fact that I think that governance can be done right. Who here, raise a hand real quick, who here thinks that or has a pretty good idea of what money laundering is? I'm not going to call on anybody, so go ahead and feel free. Okay, I lied, I actually am going to call on somebody. What's your name again?
Bruce.
Bruce. Okay, Bruce, if you had to describe money laundering, what is it? If you had to describe it to my 4-year-old daughter who knows what money is and gets it.
Taking money that was gained through illegal means and blending it into the mainstream banking system.
Yeah, perfect. So it's taking money that was attained through illicit means, layering it into the financial system with the ultimate goal of obscuring its original sources and making it look as though it was clean, ultimately adding to the wealth of the guy that the money was being laundered for. The phrase money laundering is rumored to have originated from laundromats. right? Cash heavy businesses. And if you had some dirty money, it'd be really easy to hook up with somebody operating a laundromat. They would claim it as income on their laundromat and pay the taxes against it, clean it up, and then give you a little bit of cut of the money on the back end. That's where this phrase money laundering comes from. One of the techniques that is really common with money laundering is called a black market peso exchange. Has anyone ever heard of this? Okay, pretty cool, pretty simple. As you can imagine, it's difficult to transfer large amounts of money over borders, right? Without raising some suspicion, exactly. It's really easy to do with products though, right? Like taking $1 million painting and sending it across the border, it's not going to raise a whole lot of suspicion, right? So a black market peso exchange started to become really common when the war on drugs really took off in the 90s. And it was a means of taking, it was launched primarily by cartels in Colombia. And it was, what they had is they had operations in Colombia that was manufacturing operations, but they were distributing and selling in the United States for US dollars. They wanted to get that dirty US dollar into clean Colombian peso, right? And have it sent across borders. So the way this process works is there's a bad guy, we'll call him Jose. Okay, Jose is a broker that lives in Colombia, and his job is to develop relationships with good guys, but he's got a client who's El Jefe, right? The guy that's in charge of the cartel. Two good guys that Jose is developing a relationship. One of them is is a retailer in Colombia, right? A guy that just sells maybe some medium to high-end items in Colombia. Another one is a manufacturer and exporter in the United States who sends medium to high-end products abroad. For an example, let's say motorcycles. Okay? So Jose cuts a deal, or starts developing a relationship with this good guy in Colombia that sells Harley Davidsons, right? And Jose also develops a relationship with the guy that buys Harley Davidsons in the United States and ships them, exports them to supply, or to, through different channels to different countries. The way this process works is that the broker cuts a deal with the two, organizes a deal. He tells the retailer in Colombia that, hey, I can get you 25 pristine bikes on this date for this much money. Would you like it? Of course, the guy's really excited because it's 20% less than he could get them any other way. He goes and cuts this in, and with his relationship that he's got with the supplier in the United States, cuts the deal. Everybody's happy. This is where the money happens. Okay, is that the bad guys in the United States that have been selling drugs and having all this illicit money, they send the money directly to the manufacturer on behalf of the patsy in Colombia. Okay. The manufacturer doesn't know any better, right? The bikes then get sent, they arrive in Colombia, the retailer in Colombia then cuts a check either directly to Jose or maybe even to El Jefe himself. But he cuts a check in clean, pristine pesos, okay? It doesn't have to be pesos, it's called a black market peso exchange because that's where it was popularized. It doesn't have to be even cross-border. The point I'm trying to get at is, when I first started getting involved in this anti-money laundering world, in compliance world, my first client was American Express. Okay, we think of American Express in terms of credit cards, right? Primarily, they also run a bank, American Express Bank International, and quite a few years ago, 10 or so years ago now. American Express Bank International got in a little bit of trouble. A U.S. regulator knew about a black market peso exchange that was going on, and they started watching this black market peso exchange. They infiltrated it and started seeing what banks were being involved with these money processes. Okay, American Express was. One of the results of that is that the regulator issued what was called a consent order, which basically says you screwed up, you've got to fix all of your problems, or there's going to be serious problems. In addition to that, they were hit with a bunch of fines, a bunch of assets were frozen. But and this is kind of the point of this story, is that the worst part of it is there was a cease and desist order that accompanied this. The cease and desist order told American Express that they could not engage in some of the innovative activities that they were trying to accomplish. They couldn't expand, they couldn't take on new clients, they couldn't be involved in any mergers and acquisitions. It really froze them from being able to compete at all in a marketplace where a lot of people were involved in that at the time. Took several years for us to get their operations in order and their training in order and everything so that they could clear up that consent order. In that example, there was a crime that was happening. A regulator stepped in because of that crime, not only fined them, but also froze their innovation, killed their innovation. It was gone until they could clear it up. We'll fast forward real quick. The last client that I have, the one I'm wrapping up the project for right now, how many have heard of BB&T? Okay, BB&T, if you look in some of you may have remembered, it was fairly big news. They're a regional bank, Southeast United States. They're actually the largest bank in the United States that are regulated by the FDIC. They earn their bread and butter by being a branch bank in the southeast of the United States, where there's a lot of good old boys, a lot of small towns. BB&T was the bank that funded the farmers. They funded a lot of the startups that were, mom and pop shops and that sort of thing. Their bread and butter was they decided rather than focusing on cities, they're going to go into every little tiny town in the southeast of the United States and build a branch. The thing is, in those towns, everybody knows each other, right? And when I'm the banker that's writing loans and my neighbor, Fred the farmer, comes in, I don't have a whole lot of worry about doing a full background check on Fred. I know who he is, right? So all of their operations got pretty lax when it came to finding out who their employees were. 2016 rolls along. The FDIC, in conjunction with North Carolina, decided that they're going to do an audit of BB&T and make sure that their operations are okay in terms of their KYC, which is know your customer, their KYC operations. And they were found lacking. However, there was no evidence that any crimes were committed at all. Right? They just simply were not engaging in best business practice, the industry standards. However, they got hit with a consent order. And they got hit with a cease and desist. They couldn't open up any new branches. They couldn't close any branches that were unprofitable. They couldn't be involved with any mergers. They couldn't enter into any partnerships. And this is a time in 2016, 2017, some record liquidity in the markets, right? There was a lot of big money that's available for banks to be able to expand, right? So they were froze at a time when their business plan was to be expanding and innovating as fast and as quickly as possible. So the first story that I told you was an example. There was a crime, and the regulators stepped in and did what regulators do and stopped everything until the crime could be solved. The second example, there was no crime. But the regulators did what regulators do, and they came in and stopped the innovation. Okay. The reason for both of them is because both American Express and BB&T their operations were not up to industry standard. Okay? So we have this issue that with American Express, it's understandable, right? There was these crimes, it had to happen, that because of the role of the regulators, they had to step in and deal with this. There was a lot of people at BB&T that felt like, at times especially, that the regulators were overstepping their bounds and they were over-regulating. And I'm going to bring this all back into blockchain, okay? the situation that we were up against there is that there's a difference. I'm a civil libertarian. I'm the worst kind of libertarian, okay? I'm the type of libertarian that would make Ayn Rand blush if I were to talk to her about my political beliefs, okay? I hate regulation. Every time I hear new financial protections being passed, it makes me a little bit sick to my stomach. I hate overreach, okay? But there's something that's more damaging than overreach, and that's regulatory uncertainty. It's not knowing what's coming down the road. Entrepreneurs are in the business of trying to predict the future, period. That's what entrepreneurs do. The more uncertainty there is in a system, the harder it is to predict the future, the harder it is to plan. The financial system has become very siloed since we dropped the gold standard. It became very siloed, even more so since 2011. And all of those little silos became very the different regulators that are in the United States, they battled for their little fiefdoms, for lack of a better word, okay? In a heavily siloed system, that works. But something happened about 10 years ago. Satoshi came along, right? And he started pulling these pieces of these silos out and putting them into one system. And so now in the United States, we have this blockchain, and we have cryptocurrency, and we have all of these regulators that are used to neat silos for what they're in charge of. And now they're fighting over who is in control, who can manage, who has the right authority and the right experience to be able to regulate this new beast that's there. And we don't know yet. Right? We don't know how that's going to pan out. There's this big, giant regulatory uncertainty that's out there. So this is why when I started exploring EOS and I started watching the governance discussions that were being involved, I realized that, that this is an opportunity to change things. This is an opportunity to make it so that entrepreneurs in this blockchain space finally have a degree of certainty. And here's how. Sorry, that was my... My wife, she was an associate at Goldman Sachs for about 6 years. And we had a lot of discussions about her experience with their regulatory oversight and ours. They have been setting the standard for almost a decade for best practices in a lot of their regulatory or compliance related activities and operations. The part of the culture that they have there at Goldman Sachs is that they want to stay ahead of the regulators as much as possible. They want to set standards that are higher and become the standard that all the other banks and investment banks have to follow. Right? So their idea is that they want to create systems and operations that become industry standards. Right? So rather than being behind the 8 ball, they're in front of it, and that they don't have to change when the regulators come and do the regulators' jobs. That brings us to these discussions that we're having with EOS today. We are finally in a situation that we can decide as a community what the right governance should be. We can with these discussions and trying to convince each other about the proper way to move forward, we can establish industry best standards that don't just work for EOS itself or the EOS sidechain, but they become the standard for all decentralized blockchain. Okay. If we're able to do that, what happens is, first of all, all of the competitors and competing blockchains out there, they'll have to step up and mirror the standards, the industry best standards that Goldman Sachs, that EOS has adopted, and then also they'll have to, and if we're successful in that, if we get there, because the regulators don't know what's going on, they are going to look at, much the way the regulators use Goldman Sachs to set the standards, the regulators are going to use the blockchain that is setting the standard as their model for governance, right? So this is the opportunity that we have, and it's why there's so much passion that's going on in these governance talks today, is that we have the opportunity to get in front of the regulators. EOS is not a first mover in decentralized blockchains, right? So they don't have that advantage, but we do have the advantage of being able to design the governance structure to make it so that all other blockchains after us have to step in line. Regulation is coming, whether we like it or not. It's my hope and my vision that EOS, that we can develop a self-governance structure that is so strong and so clear that whichever regulator steps forward and has the ultimate authority to start governing, at least here in the United States, and frankly the same model in every other country, they look to EOS and the self-governance structure that's developed there, and leverage it as their model. And so that's why I'm so excited about this. Again, I jumped in. Anybody can jump into this network. If anybody has any excitement at all about governance or wants to get involved, talk to me or Thomas. I know that Thomas is going to talk a little bit more about what's going on. I think he's going to talk about governance. I actually don't know what he's going to talk about, but I'm assuming that's.
He's going to talk about governance.
Okay. But I wanted to come here today when he invited me because I wanted you to see that I'm just a guy, right? I'm just a guy. And the way this community is going to work is concerned token holders stepping up and really trying to think through some of the problems and getting involved, not just on the voting side, but also on suggesting changes and trying to think about how they want the world to work and how blockchain can help out. So that's my story.
Thanks, man. So I think Thomas is getting ready. He's going to give a discussion about, I think, get a lot more specific. He's obviously been involved in all of this from the very beginning. And just a note about the meetup. So we brought this together and it will be EOS focused, but a lot of what we want to do as well is I'm starting to make contacts. So some of you came from the Government Blockchain Association, probably. We want to start bringing in people who can talk to the regulatory environment in the United States, around the world. So if you guys know of anybody, that would be great. Contact me. I would love to meet them and have anybody come and speak. But we're hoping that because of our proximity to DC here, that we'll become a meetup where people can hear the sort of latest of what's going on and what the updates are, regulations in the industry, various governance talks. And then we'll always be talking about EOS. There'll be at least one speaker here that's going to be discussing EOS, and then we hope to be bringing you at least one sort of application as well that's going to be launching on the chain. So just so you guys know, in the future, that's the format, kind of like a DApp that's going to be deployed on the EOS chain that's hopefully interesting, and then somebody who's talking about the latest governance and the ongoing experiment of EOS, and then hopefully somebody who's bringing like a general compliance governance concept. So this is Thomas Cox, everybody, and he's going to talk to you about EOS blockchain governance.
But first, I need a selfie of all of you and me for my wife. Say, I'm here, I'm safe, and people are like happy to see me, sort of. Yeah? Tess will say hi. Say hi. Okay. I should have been here many hours ago. Between United Airlines and a thunderstorm, I was not. My 2 p.m. departure became a 4:45 p.m. departure that I then had to circle Dulles for a while before getting on the ground. And yet, here we all are. So, showing where there's a will, there's a way. A bit of background on me, and then I'm going to ask you about yourselves. Actually, I'm going to reverse that. Let me ask about you first. Who here has programmed or worked on a smart contract? Okay, cool. So all everyone's like, oh, I'm going to talk to them later. That's really cool. Who has attempted to work on a smart contract or invoke one? And who has heard of smart contracts and thinks maybe they know what they are? And then whoever has a hand, and then they can wave it in the air. All right, super. So we got a mixed group, and that's awesome. And I'm guessing by now you know quite a bit about the EOS.io project. I'm Thomas Cox. My background is databases originally. I was employee 8078 at Oracle Corporation back in 1989. I did database work for like 12, 15 years. And near the end there, I was noticing that our projects really struggled. I was told that we didn't have good sound, so several people telegrammed me and said, make them turn it up. I'm just going to stand right here over the top of it. And if you still can't hear it, I'm sorry. And the challenge was that these database projects would struggle, maybe you've seen this, over people issues, and they would blame the technology because the technology wouldn't yell back. It was not safe to say, well, look, really what's going on is Fred and Barney just won't talk to each other, and that's why we're stuck, and that's why we're developing two things in parallel that will never work together. But you can't say that, right? I mean, you'd get your head handed to you. And there's like, you got to bill your hours and feed your family. So these projects would get into this horrible state where engineering wouldn't fix them. And I didn't have the skills to fix them. And yet I had a degree in psychology as an undergraduate. And I thought, damn it, there's got to be a solution here, and I don't want to spend the next 15 years of my career dealing with this. So how do we shift this? And so I changed into management consulting and just studied like a novice this idea of leadership, of how do engineers become leaders, how do technology teams work, what are the dynamics with people, and I got really good at it eventually. There's some growth stories I could tell you if we had a longer time. This led to me, among other things, learning enough about leadership to run for governor of the state of Oregon as the Libertarian candidate, and then become the state chair of the Libertarian Party the following year when we were the fastest growing Libertarian Party in the country, which many years later would come kind of big stamp of approval on my forehead when I got involved in crypto. It's like, oh, you're a libertarian, you must be okay. I'm like, no one's ever said that to me before outside of libertarians. That's really sweet. And I find that we share a lot of the same, biases and prejudices and worldviews. And this is an interesting chance to see just how much libertarian thinking can, combined with the right technology, make a huge difference in people's lives. So what about blockchain governance? You'll see the segue here in a moment. So first a little bit about what EOS does that, other than governance, it's faster, smarter, better, we believe. We've got half-second blocks. When the Byzantine fault tolerance piece is added in, it's going to be 1 second finality. I have no idea if it's in there or not. I've lost track of the technology side because I'm deep into governance, but that is on the board to be done. This delegated proof of stake, greater decentralization by certain metrics, and over 1,000 transactions per second, single-threaded launch. We think we know the test nets on sort of average hardware are getting working from 400 to 600 transactions per second, which is lovely. But you can have my slides as a PDF if you're interested. Human-friendly names, account names instead of 30-character strings. The ability to recover a lost key. You've all heard of the guy who recycled his hard drive, and he's got like Bitcoin keys on there for like thousands of Bitcoin, and the hard drive's at the bottom of some landfill in England, and it would probably pay, if it's not degraded, to buy the landfill and scrape it and find the hard drive, because Bitcoins, keys are lost, so those Bitcoins will never come back in circulation because there's no key recovery in traditional public blockchains, which if you try to run a commercial operation, with no key recovery, oh my God, try to have that conversation with your customers. Developer-friendly things like declarative security, self-describing interfaces, and no transaction fees. We are rate limited rather than fee limited. So if you've got 1% of all the EOS tokens that are of all the people who are currently active on the system,
you would get 1% of the bandwidth if you had staked some of your tokens for bandwidth. So you stake tokens for bandwidth, that gets you bandwidth, and then when you're done with bandwidth, you can unstake them and get the tokens back, and they never get used up. It's like owning a share in a co-op. You own a share of the bandwidth. So what's the promise of public blockchain? Let's just go back on memory lane here. What do we all love about public blockchains? Decentralization, yay! It empowers the individual over the big players, and ease of entry, and better serve your customers. So what's the problem? It's decentralization. Nobody's in charge. The crooks can go wild, and they have. Up until now, the code is the law, which is all that it could be. I mean, that's not wrong. I mean, you say that when that's all you've got. It's kind of an anarcho-capitalist, devil take the hindmost, oh, your car crashed because of bad firmware. You should have reviewed the code. It's like, no, that's unrealistic. And in less than a decade, hackers have stolen $1.2 billion worth of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that's not counting the other altcoins, which are on the next page. And by the way, that's as of February, that number of thefts. Yeah, 1.2 billion. So what? By now, that's February, March, April, May. So this has got to be like 1.8 by now, right? Greatest hits of cryptocurrency thefts and hacks. Then here's the one that was missing from the prior slide because we only counted Bitcoin and Ethereum. What about NIM? $500 million worth of NIM stolen. That was brilliant. And then my all-time favorite, 300 million in cryptocurrency accidentally lost forever due to a bug. The sub-headline is so amazing. User mistakenly takes control of hundreds of wallets containing Ether, destroying them in a panic while trying to give them back. And here's the exchange with the guy it's like, now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, can you imagine being the programmer or the customer service rep or the entrepreneur who has to explain to a customer or your boss, yeah, so about our money. And what's worse is it's actually not really quite destroyed so much as it is stuck. It's right there. It's taunting them. I mean, they can see it, but there's no transaction you can enter into the Ethereum blockchain that's a valid transaction that can be executed that would pull it back. It's just sitting there. You would have to write custom code that breaks the current rules of their blockchain. It's called an irregular state change, and it's terrifying. They've had 3 different EIPs on this, which I'll talk about in a minute. I mean, it's just not working. And so who are the big players right now? There's the speculators doing their zero-sum game. If I sell high, I buy low and sell high. It's because some other idiot bought high so that I can cash out. Or miners who create coins but not value. Now the monetarists in the room, the libertarians are like, oh yeah, I get that. And everyone else is like, what do you mean? Coins not value. Coins are value. Well, not exactly. Let me explain. With an illustration that hopefully none of you feel too personally about the Spanish Empire. Some of you remember reading about the Spanish Empire, right? They've taken over the New World. They're raping and pillaging South America. It's great for them, bad for the locals. But they're bringing back just ships stuffed full of gold and jewels and emeralds, and they're just thrilled. And all of Europe is just green with envy, and poor England is stuck with the crummy northern colonies where they're raping and pillaging Northern American Indians. And all they can bring back is just raw materials to be turned into goods and services in England because there's no gold to be found. Poor England. Clearly Spain has got it right, and England's a sad runner-up. Turn the page to the next chapter. What do you find? Spain's taken a nosedive, and England is running Europe. What just happened? Well, Spain had a certain number of mules and bushels of corn and peasant shacks before the shiploads of treasure started arriving, and it had the exact same number of chickens and goats and pigs and bushels of corn after the gold showed up. It was the pre-fiat currency version of hyperinflation. The government's got more money to throw, but the economy hasn't changed. There's just more government cash chasing it. And the government thinks it's brilliant because we don't have, sophisticated economic theory back then. It's 1690 and 1710. Meanwhile, poor England has got nothing it can bring back from the New World but raw materials to turn into goods and services to grow the economy. Is it any wonder that 50 or 100 years later, one of them's in great shape and the other one has hyperinflated itself into a crisis? So yeah, coins not value. Now miners do secure the chain, which has value, but coins aren't value. They are a commodity, if you will. And then, of course, crooks are on the big public blockchains, negative-sum game. No real disincentives exist for bad behavior. We're seeing more and more 51% attacks on proof-of-work chains. In fact, there was the third one recently that I just heard about the other day where like $12 million was double spent. Has anybody heard about this? Some of you are following this better than me. Like, okay. And then what do you do with that person? You can't freeze them out. Miners are anonymous. If they have hash power, they just get to do whatever they want. So what's going on here? Well, you see there's 4 ways we can constrain human behavior. This is classic from Lawrence Lessig's. I'm going to back out of the way so you can actually see my slides. The 4 constraints, specifically in technology environments, Lawrence Lessig articulated this back in the early 90s, saying that there's market forces, legal forces, social forces, and code on the early internet. Now, of course, blockchain also has code constraining you. And I want to walk through what these look like because they're qualitatively different. And they all matter. I bring my microphone with me. So let's pretend we want to disincentivize you from stealing a bicycle. Market forces. How might we disincentivize the young man from stealing a bicycle? Well, the resale value of stolen bicycles is actually quite low, not worth it. That would be one. Or maybe some sort of tax or black market tax. Legal. You might get caught and punished. Right? We can pass a law and have law enforcement. Social. There might be loss of stature. You might be ostracized or looked down on by your friends. You might have internalized social values and feel shame. There's lots of ways this society guides and shapes behavior. That's fair. And then, of course, the equivalent of code for this would be there's a lock on the bike. You can't steal it. Okay, so those are the 4 forces available to us. Here it is in a text-heavy format so that when you look at the PDF and you don't remember what I said, you can read it. And what does Bitcoin look like? Well, Bitcoin's got 2 of these, and only 2. It's got code, brilliant code, that tweaks market forces to incentivize proof of work to secure the chain. And then, of course, there's external law enforcement. They'll come after you if you steal enough Bitcoin and you're sloppy enough. There's Ethereum, which also has mostly code and market forces, and there's a little bit of governance. It's off-chain, and they're struggling. EIPs 867 and 999 are 2 examples of 2 different attempts to try to claw back the $300 million from the Parity wallet hack that I mentioned, or bug. Not to mention the DAO. Some of you know about the DAO, where the community decided, yeah, so the whole code is the law thing, except when it's not. So Vitalik said. And so it's like, how firm is this anyway? And again, law enforcement is off stage. So what if we used all 4 forces together, intentionally, by design, to try to create a better blockchain that is still built on the strengths of prior designs, but had some new features? What might that look like? It might look like this. The code would allow the block producers to have superpowers, to replace broken code and code that you had declared as immutable, things that you yourself could not change, they could change. The ability to freeze accounts, the ability to move funds against the will of the current owner. Things that clearly are very dangerous to do, and therefore block producers are constrained by the Constitution, Ricardian contracts, and arbitration. You see, the block producers are elected, and if they were to begin to misuse these powers, they'd be voted out of office, and they'd face sanctions and fines. And since they're earning anywhere from $1 million to $8 million per year, for, frankly, fairly low effort. You don't need an Icelandic data center to run this. You need a couple of computers, maybe as many as 8 with some redundancy and some failovers and whatnot. Our best estimate is it costs you about $1 million a year in most jurisdictions or less, including staff time. So between 2 and 8 million in income for $1 million of expenditure, sweet. Now, you might spend some of that on PR to get those votes, right? But still, it's not a bad sinecure. And, of course, if you're a true believer, then you get to create a better world while making nice money. And so it would take quite a bit to persuade somebody, A, here, let me bribe you. Oh, wait, I have to bribe 15 of you. You all have to agree. None of you have to rat me out or turn me in, and it has to stick long enough for me to get away with it. And I have to bribe you enough for you to give up a perpetual, let's say, 3 to 5 million, let's say it's $4 million per year, 3 million profit. How much of a bribe would you need to give up 3 million a year in profit year after year, off into the horizon, plus you're plugged into this cool community? So yeah, I'm going to throw that all away for how much? Well, I've got a price, but it's not low. And you'd need to revive 15 of them simultaneously and hope that we didn't notice it, freeze it, fork the chain back 2 minutes ago, unroll your changes, fire those guys, hire new guys from the list of 100 standby producers, and go on our merry way. Now, it might take a little work. It might take us a couple of days. But it's not that easy to break. We've got repeated interactions from the social side, skin in the game from a market perspective, in the Constitution, Ricardian contracts, and arbitration, as I mentioned, legally. So I want to look into this a little more deeply. So here's some governance elements. From a legislative perspective, the token holders elect the block producers, and they set policy via referenda. They are the decision makers. They can do nothing, but they decide everything. The executive are the block producers. They have the superpowers, but they have no authority whatsoever to act on their own initiative. They can only carry out policy from the referenda and enforce judgments from the judicial branch, the arbitrators, who can make any ruling at all, but only on the cases that are brought to them, and only among two parties who have agreed to give that arbitrator that power. So it's a pretty nice division of labor. And of course, the Constitution and contract law. We have approval voting. Why approval voting? People ask this question. I've added slides. Every time I have a heated 10-minute discussion in the middle, I add a slide to cover it. So there's always somebody who's like big into voting theory. And so I say, well, okay, here's the result of single winner, admittedly, but it's a Bayesian analysis of 2.2 million trials using all the different, random winner, worst one, but very simple. Plurality voting, right, state of the art in the United States. Worse than everything except randomness, and that's arguable. Condorcet method, which is the most complicated and gives you a wide range of shitty to pretty good. Instant runoff voting, board account, score voting, and approval voting. You'll notice that score voting can be better than approval, but approval's no worse than the bottom end of score, and it's a ton easier. And that's why we're using approval voting. It's because we know how to implement that, we know how to explain it to voters, and they know how to cast those votes. And it's better than that whole half, 3/4, 7/8 of the page. It looks something like this. You are a voter. You go down the list of block producers and you say this one, this one, this one. It's multiplied by how many staked tokens you've got, and it just added up here. So block producer 7's got 970 vote power from the 4 or 5 votes he's got multiplied by the number of tokens, right? Top vote getter has everybody voting for him. So of 2,000 possible, he's got 2,000. But that's only 16.67% of all votes cast because you could only vote for him once. Right? You've got 6 votes in this game, so 5/6 of the voting has to be for other people. So this is the most he can get. Now, in our system, it's 30 approval votes. So 1 over 30, 3.3% is the absolute maximum. Figure 2.5% most likely is the most you'll get. This is important because of how we pay people. You get paid for blocks you produce if you're an active block producer, but you get paid for votes you got whether you're active or not. And as long as you're a standby producer, you could be in 23rd place, never make a block, but you're getting paid every day because you got enough votes to be in 23rd place, which means you're running a data center, you're hosting a full node, you're read-only node, you're taking in transactions from the public, you're helping people get access to the chain, and you're available as a standby if 1 through 21 act up and need to be shown the door, or one of them has some sort of technical problem and needs to be set aside. So that's the redundancy in some of the backstory. It's not nearly as decentralized as Bitcoin, not nearly as decentralized as Ethereum, and it seems to work. and it lets us do these other things. So on Ricardian contracts, I mentioned those, they're important. So start with the purpose of your smart contract and write it out in English. And say, okay, what's my intention? Let's take the example of block producer voting, which we just looked at, right? Here is what that contract, the Ricardian contract could look like, which is an expression of the intention of the parties, not an expression of code. It has to match to the code. The input parameters have to be the same. So you might say something like, as an authorized party, I, the signer, wish to vote on behalf of voter, because you might have a proxy, right? I might be signing for you because you gave me proxy. So I would mention you here in voter and me as the signer, yeah? A certain number of tokens for this array of block producers, 1 through 30. You just pass in a data structure, blah, blah, blah. And then it gets interesting in blue. If I am not the beneficial owner of these tokens, translation, I'm an exchange. I'm with Kraken, I'm any of those. Binance. I have proof I've been authorized to vote these shares by their beneficial owners, and I stipulate I have not and will not accept anything of value in exchange for these votes on penalty of confiscation of these tokens and other penalties. Now people look at that and say, well, how are you going to prove that? Well, that's just the thing. Every time you go to give or receive a bribe, you have to wonder, is my counterparty trustworthy, or is he just about to turn me in for a share of the penalty I'll be levied with? Oh, dear. Now, in other chains, vote buying is normalized. It's within the rules. And even if it weren't, there's no way to punish people. Here, I can haul you in for arbitration. The arbitrator can freeze your entire account, you whale you. And here we come with the blubber knives and the harpoons. So, yeah, suddenly being a whale with a bunch of tokens also puts you at greater risk, in addition to having more at stake for the health of the chain. In addition, so you've got, being a whale no longer gives you carte blanche to do anything you like and damn the consequences. We put the Ricardian contracts typically in the same system directory with your source code. It might look like this, which gives you, with the double curly braces, gives a web designer the ability, using handlebars and mustache markup, to display it here. Like, I, blah, on behalf of myself, if it's the same value, this list of block producer candidates, blah, 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 make them put a check mark even next to the onerous clauses so they really can't pretend they didn't see them, and then make them cryptographically sign. And then, of course, this is in what's called the ABI, right? You know what that is. The Application Binary Interface, which is a text file. It contains the Ricardian contract and all the arguments, and it's part of the blockchain state. So we can prove at the time you cast the vote what this said that you agreed to. So if you're ever in front of an arbitrator, there's no question what the intention of this contract was, in addition to how it executed, which means we can go to an arbitrator and say, you know, that parity wallet, the intention was not to destroy the $300 million. And the arbitrator would say, well, let's look. You're right, Rabbit, you're right. There's no evidence here that this was not the intent. Destroying the $300 million was not the intention of this code. You know, do you party 1 and do you party 2 both agree that this is wrong? Yes, 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 that's wrong. Okay, great. I, as an arbitrator, will enter an order to pull the money back, send it off to the block producers. They see that all the parties agreed. I signed it. I'm an arbitrator. Boom. They put it in their queue. 15 of them or more sign it. Goes into a 30-day execution queue, rolls forward, then the money comes back. La. Now, you might have a hard, boss, I'm sorry, it's going to be 30 days before we get our $300 million back, is a much different conversation than it's gone forever, but it's going to sit there and taunt us for 20 years. We've got, this has been rewritten, but this is an old version about what the block producers would have to agree regarding arbitration, that as a block producer I would agree to accept as valid any arbitrator's order that's signed by an arbitrator, and that the chain shows was assigned to a case, and the order affects the accounts named in the case, and the arbitrator's forum authorized the arbitrator, and the transaction that gave rise to the case named the forum. And so you have this lovely chain of foreign keys and primary keys that show you that this order coming from that person affecting these two accounts makes sense, because the order changes the values of the two accounts. And the transaction they signed named him as the arbitrator. So they gave him permission to do this, and one of them probably signed the order and said, yeah, I concur. And then it goes to a 30-day queue anyway, so if there's fraud, you got a long time to find it out. We've got life cycle of arbitration here, which I will not walk you through. And this is very complicated. We are essentially going from the Wild West law of the jungle crazy time, or what's the other alternative, right? It's hyperledger, it's totally permissioned, it's a bunch of rules from on high, it's top down, command and control. It doesn't matter what you think, I'll tell you what to think. Instead, we've got this society where you've got arbitrators, and you might be a party. You might even be an arbitrator, you know. And you've got repeated interaction. So we're going to need psychology, sociology, experimental economics, cryptography, computer science, political science, criminology, theoretical economics, forensic accounting, and organizational development, among other things, to run this. And I want to give you, when I mentioned organizational development, I think that's particularly interesting because it goes beyond the technology layer and even the governance layer to think about what is possible. What can we start to unlock that is a challenge otherwise? This is a diagram from an excellent book called Reinventing Organizations. It's not actually from the book, it's from someone who admired the book and drew the diagram. This is an application by Frederick Laloux of Ken Wilber's integral theory applied to organizational development. And if you don't know who either of those guys are, no worries, go look it up, it's really cool. But I'll walk you through it. His suggestion is that every breakthrough in human organization contains the elements of the prior levels plus some new stuff that's interesting. So we've got, let's imagine that below this is you're living in a state of nature, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, as Thomas Hobbes might have put it. And so you band together into a street gang or a mafia or some tribal militia, which is run on power, fear, and chaos, but it does have command authority and division of labor, and you have a slightly higher standard of misery than the guys who are outside of the militia looking in. What's worse than being in a street gang is being out of a street gang. Okay, great, but that's sort of crappy. So what would be better than that? How do we, evolve to a higher level of organization? You go up to these amber organizations, which add long-term perspective, process, and formal roles. Oh my God, there's a camera in there? They've been looking at my left armpit all this time. I'm so sorry. Okay. So, and yes, we will get these slides to you. And so these are your public schools, your military. It's very rigid, this amber structure of the Catholic Church. It doesn't matter what you're good at. If you're born a blacksmith's son, you'll be a blacksmith. You're born a serf, you'll die a serf. There's a caste system. But at least we're not fearing the stab in the back in the middle of the night and the chaos of the tribal militia or the street gang. So here in amber, you can build pyramids and canals and have organized slavery, which isn't all that great. So let's go up one level. And okay, out of amber we get into orange. Let's add things like competition, profit, innovation, accountability, and meritocracy, where you could be born a blacksmith's son, but you could rise to become CEO of Ford if you have the breaks and the ability, right? And when you have meritocracy, you can go a lot further than when you don't. So you get large corporations, certain public universities, and now you've got growth for its own sake. And so you end up with a multinational like Coca-Cola, which supposedly at one point had as their goal to make Coca-Cola more popular than water, which when you think about it is just disgusting. But hey, money, right? So at some point, orange starts to lose its, it's like, yeah, okay, it's not amber, but I'm no longer happy being better than amber. I'm in orange, and I'm like, can I do something better than growth for growth's sake, which is like cancer? How about we get into green, where there's stakeholder balance, culture over strategy. We actually have a purpose. We'll actually forego profit in order to pursue our mission. We will treat all of our employees as stakeholders. We'll delight our customers. The Ben and Jerry's, the Lean Six Sigma, the Agile people are very much in this. The downside of green is, for many organizations, including some I've consulted for, an excessive reliance on consensus, and everybody has to agree, and nobody can disagree, and everybody has to be happy, and so if one person's unhappy, they have a veto over everything. I had a group of 11 people in a small nonprofit operating in green, and they couldn't do anything, and they had 3 silos with 11 people. It's bizarre. So what do you do for that? Well, teal, the color teal is the next layer up. And that is rare right now, but if you want to look into Buurtzorg, Buurtzorg, they are a home visit nursing organization based originally in the Netherlands. Home visit nursing is very expensive, low margins, a lot of turnover, a lot of burnout. It tends to be run by, well, orange organizations who use people up. They want to be efficient, and they're constantly changing who your caretaker is. The caretakers hate it, the patients hate it. They can't keep track of what your meds are, who's supposed to visit you when. It's a mess. So Buurtzorg breaks it up into groups of, I believe it's 12 visiting nurses who are self-autonomous within the larger structure. So we've got autonomy and distributed decision-making, and anti-fragility, and self-management. Now, what does that sound like, decentralization, to you, blockchain? Would it not be cool to see that scale up around the world? And I believe, maybe blockchain has a role to play in that societal and cultural revolution. I bet I'm the first person to talk to you about that in a blockchain meeting. This is some cool shit. So teal is great. There's even a color beyond teal. I don't even know what the drawbacks of teal are yet because there aren't enough of them. But at some point we'll have to transcend that as well. And we've still got, command authority and anger and fear and hierarchy and accountability and meritocracy. We're including the lower layers, right? It's yes and, it's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's growth and evolution. Okay, enough woo-woo. On to use cases. Many of you know a lot of these, so I will be brief. And these are not EOS specific, they're just blockchain specific, because often there are people in the audience who are like, so what can you use a blockchain for? Great question. Things like in automotive, ride sharing and vehicle sharing. A company called Tesloop. Some of you have heard of Tesloop. It is a Tesla sharing service in Southern California. They're earning several $1,000s per month per Tesla, and they don't even own the vehicles. And the owners just buy their Tesla, plug it into the system. It's managed by the organization. They're putting their reservation system on EOS right now. They're run in centralized servers now, but they're moving up. And so they've got the driver is a different person from the person who cleans it, who's a different person from who owns it. It's wacky. You can get a ride from LA to San Diego for $50 in a Tesla with a couple of other people. And people are eating it up. They love it. Blah, 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 charity. Credit history. Imagine owning your own credit history. Organization called ReCredit, R-E-Credit, is working on this. They're in the early stages, and they would love your help. And I think that they can take a page from Iryo, I-R-Y-O, which is doing blockchain-based medical records similar to credit histories, right? There's sensitive records about you, but we don't keep the medical information on the chain. We keep the access control list on the blockchain. So you can always tell definitively and up to date who's allowed to read and write to and from your information. Oh, wouldn't that be lovely? I'm cutting out, I could talk about several more of these, but I'm going to jump forward. Energy, there's a couple of startups, including at least one in New England, where you can take your home solar panel array, plug it into a blockchain-enabled reader that credits you in more or less real time as you're feeding energy into the grid, and other people are being billed for what they're pulling off the grid. And it's just blockchain transactions, so it's real time, no big central server and monthly reconciliation. Government voting, IoT insurance, flight insurance. Great example on flight insurance. Instead of having a 6-hour flight delay being paid for that, I would have cashed in on this one. These guys cover 2-hour or more flight delays, and it's in a smart contract. So you stick in your crypto or whatever that is that they're taking. You put in your flight information, and if the FAA.gov Oracle data feed says that your flight that you just bought insurance for got delayed 2 or more hours, it just pays you. You don't submit a claim. It doesn't take 45 days and 3 typos and having to call them and yell at them over the phone. There's no room full of pasty people in a basement somewhere going over forms. It's just a smart contract. There's probably like one guy running this thing, and he's in Bermuda. You get it running, it works. So you're better protected as a traveler. They can charge you less, pay you more, and it's just less work. Flipping amazing. On around, media, of course, owning intellectual property.
Already doing that.
I'm not sure which blockchain they're on, but I'm aware of it being.
Ethereum.
It is Ethereum. Awesome.
AXA, they already have it in
AXA.
production.
Excellent. AXA. And let's talk. Someone who knows them, talk to them about EOS. I think we can do better. Travel, real estate. A lot of real estate startups to put tokenized fractional ownership of real estate assets that are otherwise illiquid. Wills and inheritances. The ability to have a centralized registry so that here's the most recent will. You can't read it necessarily, but you can see where to find it. Things like that. CryptoKitties or other collectibles. I mentioned Testloop and Erio, Eos, the social sharing app. Luxury goods provenance is a big, big deal. It's hard to charge a premium price when people are afraid that what they have in their hand is a knockoff. Okay, so you shoot it with your phone and you see blockchain enabled, the exact chain of custody, who made it, with what sourced materials. I can prove it's cruelty free. I can prove that it's not sweatshop labor, all the way through this common carrier to this facility to this store to you.
Can EOS create sort of digital assets in that sense?
Oh, you mean, yeah, basically you do a CryptoKitty equivalent to your digital good, and then you track all of its facts.
Kind of create an address with it?
That's how I imagine it would probably have to be implemented. There's some guys in Australia at a winery, or actually a consortium of wineries working on this right now. Okay. They've got a startup with some code already running on EOS. That's exciting. A lot of people in that space and logistics and supply chain, they're very interested in this. Obviously, notary and registry services are pretty obvious. Bearer instruments, on and on and on. Construction tracking, one of my favorites. Would it be nice to be able to say, that building over there, there's a problem with the siding. Who installed it and what batch of siding from which manufacturer and which lot number was that from? Well, I don't remember, but with the blockchain I don't have to, if you track the details. Blockchain Construction Institute is working on several things around that. Network effects, more users, at least in theory, more potential customers. EOS does have a very broad distribution. I say pre-launch and counting. We're approximately 2 days, we think, maybe from launch. We have some pretty wide pre-launch adoption and a growing list of tools. And that's my prepared remarks. I will happily take your questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I noticed that arbitrators are a big part of the process.
Yes, 1/3 of governance.
I see. Okay. So normally, I guess, I haven't read too many textbooks on how the political system works in the judiciary system, but if you have a system where you have peers that are essentially arbitrators in the actual court system in real life, and so our arbitrators here, they're cryptographers and they're essentially blockchain experts, right?
Why would your arbitrator need to be a blockchain expert?
I saw one of the slides had a list of like 8 different points that they had.
Oh, I said, no, that was a different, I'm sorry. That was a list of the various disciplines that this industry needs.
Okay.
Not that a person needs. Oh my God. Blockchain's bad enough as it is. Come on. No, I'm very sorry. I have to go back and relabel the slide. That was actually a slide that was for a talk I was giving at York University in Toronto, where I was trying to express to people who don't even know what blockchain is, hey, your discipline, your non-computer science discipline, we need you. You have a place here. Because I promise you, a bunch of crypto folks, when it comes to things like non-obvious game theory elements that involve psychology and subjective states of people's brains, we're like, yeah, no, that's not us. I will illustrate engineering thinking by a joke. It's the French Revolution. A lawyer, a doctor, and an engineer have all been sentenced to death at the guillotine. The only choice they have, face up or face down. The lawyer says, face up, I will look to heaven. throws him down. The blade descends, and it malfunctions, and it stops right above his neck. And the mob yells, "It's a sign, free him!" And the executioners are terrified to defy the mob. They let the lawyer go. The doctor's next. He said, face up, face down. He said, well, face up worked for that guy. I'll take face up. Again, it malfunctions. They set him free. Now the engineer goes down or face up. Face up, I've never seen one of these things before. They put him in. Before they can grab the lever, he says, wait, I see the problem. On the one hand, fascinated by technology. On the other hand, clueless about context. Don't fix the machine that's going to kill you. So, yeah, terrible arbitrators. Probably. So, what we're looking for with arbitrators specifically is a skill set not too different from systems analysts. And there's a lot of work that's been done on the psychology of a good arbitrator, and we've been able to tap into the knowledge of a group called CA CERT. CA CERT similarly had online assets, namely old SSL certificates, proof of that you were Coca-Cola.com and that you should own that name, and people would fight over domain names, and CA CERT got a lot of those cases. And they were the arbitrators, final ruling. And they learned a lot about how to recruit and how to train arbitrators, and we had 2 people from CA CERT consult with us very heavily on our design of arbitration. We've got a guy out of London, actually Cambridge, who's heading that up, a guy named Moti Tabula. I'd love for you to talk to him if you're interested. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting backstory on just the arbitration side. Go ahead.
Well, so I guess block 1 is deciding who the arbitrators
Nope.
are?
Block 1 has nothing to do with it.
Okay, so who decides the arbitrators, if it's block producers or they voted?
So at launch, this is a great question. How do you get arbitrators? So at launch, it looks like, we don't know for sure because we're still finalizing through a community process what the exact details of one line and the governance is going to be. We're naming the International Chamber of Commerce, who has an arbitration practice, as the arbitration of last resort, which means in your Ricardian contract, if you don't name anybody else as your arbitration forum, you get them. Now, you and your dispute partner can always go and say, yeah, let's agree to go somewhere else. And you can totally agree to disagree elsewhere. And then you go take it to a different forum. And we're spinning up a forum called EOS Core Arbitration Forum, made up of people who are in the community, understand EOS, understand us and the space a little bit. And if you had a bunch of, let's say you do CryptoKitties, and that's a big deal for you, and there's a lot of CryptoKitty disputes, it might make total sense to go out and create a CryptoKitty arbitration forum made up of people who understand that domain. OpenBazaar does arbitration. You know about OpenBazaar. And they just set it up in advance that 2 parties name a third party they both trust and say, he's our arbitrator, and you get a 2 of 3 multi-sig for your transaction, and that arbitrator just can step in if you 2 start fighting. Which is kind of neat.
ICON is probably the only one, so block Lancer, but I like it a lot. Have you ever heard of Upwork?
Oh, Upwork, yeah.
One of these freelancer sites. But one of the big problems is, between 2 parties, if you're doing some freelance work, you might deliver great work, but then the guy will say, hey, if you don't cut your hours or, lower your rate, I'm going to give you a bad review.
Right.
So you're kind of held hostage. But what they're introducing is sort of like a tribunal for that.
You see how important that kind of thing is, because you get some pretty messy he said, she said, hey, I gave it to you. That's not what I asked for. It's exactly what you asked for. Here's
on a platform like that, you live off your reviews.
Yes, you absolutely do.
Yeah.
And I can see how that could be a real risk for the freelancer. Yeah, you had a hand up.
Yeah. So I studied research like a bunch of different blockchains, they do proof of work, proof of stake, and delegated proof of stake.
Those are the big 3, yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's others, by the way, and there's a paper by Charles Evans wrote a paper comparing a bunch of different protocols and which use cases are most appropriate for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not tell you that any one of those 3 is better than the others, unless you had a specific use case, and then we could talk about which one is the best fit for your use case. But go ahead.
For sure. Proof of work, Bitcoin runs proof of work, and it does about 7 or 8 transactions a second. Ethereum is about 17, and they're migrating towards proof of stake. Both delegated proof of stake, especially with Steemit, what stops cartels from forming?
Awesome question.
Yeah. So I'm just curious about that, especially in the community. A lot of people have been talking about it, and I'm curious myself just to know what is stopping cartels from exchanges, like taking over EOS as a community.
Right. So I think I've got somewhere. Oh, doggone it.
I think the last thing you said was the most important. If a block producer is an exchange, and people have their EOS on there.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of block producer candidates which are exchanges. For example, EOS for
How do you make sure they don't
there's
go crazy or anything?
Huobi is also one as well.
Right. So let's have a look at blocktivity. Make that a little bit bigger. Not legible? Right, so this is blockchain activity by transactions and how busy the system is. So Steam currently doing the most activity by their measure, Ethereum next, BitShares, so Steam and BitShares are number 1 and number 3, both distributed, so delegated proof of stake, both Dan Larimer projects actually. Bitcoin, Golos, Doge. Doge, hey! Awesome.
I actually haven't done that much research on BitShares. I know they run delegated proof of stake, but I don't know if it's...
So here's Ethereum, right? 100% blockchain capacity and 45,859 unconfirmed transactions in the backlog. And then let's look at Bitcoin. They're only at 43% capacity. Hey, look at that. Compared to Steam, which is currently running faster than everybody else, at 0.14% capacity, and BitShares at 0.06. And believe me, they don't have the huge data centers in Iceland. So you can get more through because it runs differently. Hang on. My phone thinks I need an alarm right now. I muted it.
So I think you were talking about cartels.
Sorry.
And I can
Yeah, cartels and
we've
cartel
been in the
formation.
block producer discussion a lot, and one of the issues is, again, as a community, we're demanding things like transparency of ownership and confirmation. And so we're starting to figure out, well, how do you do that, right? So someone says, well, all right, we want to see their articles of incorporation, because almost every block producer is going to need a company. You're not going to run $6 million through your personal bank account. You might, but you're probably not going to get far. But then they say, well, okay, well, how are they going to do that? They're going to fake it. What if they fake, their articles of incorporation? Anybody could draw those up, and then someone says, well, we're going to need them notarized or whatever. But, these are the discussions we're having as a community, and I'm just pointing to that. To the idea is that, again, what always it comes down to as a block producer is that if you are going to start to do something the community doesn't like, the community is going to demand that you respond in a way in which they're satisfied, and if not, you're going to be voted out in a matter of days.
Well, what if block producers, or not block producers, but what if there's 2 or 3 block producers and they're in, I don't know really how to word it correctly, but basically what I'm trying to say is so I believe Brandon Bloomer, he was also an advisor for InBlockchain. InBlockchain is also a block producer candidate.
Right.
There's 2 organizations by the same name.
Okay.
He was involved with one in blockchain, and it's a different in blockchain that's doing the block production.
Okay. So...
And he's not currently an advisor for the first one. So.
Okay. Interesting. From what I read, it was, that was a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
But what's stopping from one block producer being with another block producer as well? So say, I'm not going to use block 1, let's say EOS for next, because they're a block producer candidate. It's also, say they're a block producer, say they get voted in, but what if someone else who's in EOS for next is also in another?
Right, or it's partial ownership, for example, right?
Exactly.
Well, in the Constitution right now, we have it that you can't own more than 10% of another BP. But the community is currently debating whether they even like that, and if it needs to go to 0%. And again, the community will decide. Is 10%
even if the Constitution
reasonable?
allows, say, 10% ownership, if the voters really think, I don't think I like 10%.
Then you're out.
See, here's the thing. The block producers are just touchingly, wonderfully insecure. It's adorable. They're so desperate to be loved and voted for. They'll do anything. You want me to wear a pink jumpsuit? The brightest pink jumpsuit you ever saw. You want stripes on it? I'll sew the stripes on myself. Please vote for me. And that's what's going on right now. We've got one guy, I love it, out of Texas, who's convinced that independence is like really what the voters are going to want. No one really knows what the voters are going to want. That's part of our challenge. And so he's like completely maxed out, independence, nobody owns any shares outside of the core group. Here's who we are, here's how to find out about us. We're going to like share our corporation, and he's going to share everything, like transparent books. He's getting wacky. It's like, dude, are you really sure you want to do this? But he really wants to win, right? So there's a lot of experiments of like, how far do I have to go? Back in the 60s, it was considered inappropriate to talk to political candidates about their finances. It's like, you'd be run for president of the United States, you wouldn't actually have to talk about what you owned. And then Richard Nixon, in a bid to save his candidacy for something, I think it was vice president, like pegged the needle with just total transparency financially, and everyone was afraid to be less than that. And so that started this trend of like everybody having to disclose all their finances. And so you see there can be this collective raising of the bar by even one candidate. So we'll see. But to the extent that the voters as a market demand a certain level of like trustworthiness, they will require you to show evidence of trustworthiness. Or there might be a competition to like, here's my proof of my trustworthiness. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And there's one other check on all of this that people keep forgetting, is that a new chain can always be spawned up, right? Is that if we
it's really wicked? Yeah.
Right,
You take over 15 block producers, you can do anything you want to.
I think there's
for about a day.
Yeah, June 1st, which is the snapshot date of Eos. I think
June 2nd.
June 2nd. I thought it was June 1st.
June 1st is when the sale ends.
Oh, sale, okay.
But then there's 23 hours worth of registration possible.
Okay.
And then the registration freezes at 10 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time, June 2nd. It's about 6 p.m. on the East Coast. I'll be sitting at a chair with a bottle of unopened champagne, waiting for that moment.
Yeah, but as you said probably a new chain will spawn, correct? I believe when EOS goes live, or when the block producers decide Tuesday it's going to go live, I think on that, or not on the day, but Evolution, I think there's conspiracy theories saying like exchanges that they're spawning you.
Well, you know, just the threat alone is enough to keep bad actors in play, or in check, and it may not turn bad people good, but it makes them less bad, right? So just the threat of losing, worst case scenario, let's say that a cartel does emerge, okay? Just the threat of the fact that they could lose their cartel means that they're going to be a good or a not overly bad cartel, right? So that ultimate threat of the other 6 block producers that aren't part of this core cartel and a whole bunch of the backup block producers can go get together and say, hey, let's go form a whole nother chain, and we'll take a snapshot of this chain as it is today, and we'll create another one and honor all of the tokens as is.
Except the cartel's tokens.
Except the cartel's tokens. That's the ultimate check.
So is there no hard forking in ES?
Oh, you have the option to hard fork. It's just hard.
Okay.
Right? I mean, what's going to happen is someone's going to propose a change, a software change, and then it's going to have to go through a referendum process. Let me pull that slide again. And the referendum is going to say, shall we, adopt this change that's been proposed? And then, acting as a legislature, the token holders will have a referendum. Right now we're suggesting that they would need to have a majority of 10% more yes than no, so 55 in favor minimum. They would have to maintain that 55% margin for 30 days continuously for it to pass. Once it passes, we say, okay, great, the community has spoken, it's a yes. It goes into an execution queue. The block producers have to do their multi-sig thing, 15 or more of them have to sign the transaction to make this software upgrade or whatever. And then it goes into a 30-day implementation queue, and then you've got time to upgrade all your hardware and your software or whatever the changes are for the people affected by it, if it's software change. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, and yes, absolutely, if there were some sort of, Ethereum Classic sort of split or Bitcoin Cash split, where someone said, we can't stand you because you're, you say potato, not potato, something, I don't know. But more meaningful, maybe. And they said, so we split over it. Okay, we take the chain, we split it at this block height. These guys make blocks on this one. These guys make blocks on Eos Prime or whatever it is. I've got accounts on both now. If I had one before, I've got two. And then there's slightly different rule sets, or we try to go from plutocracy to one person, one vote somehow, or the House of Lords and House of Commons.
Is there anything that could support collusion resistance between voters?
Collusion
resistance. That's pretty abstract.
Collusion between voters, that's called majority rules, sir. Or in this case, the money bags win, okay? This is a plutocracy, make no bones about it. This is ruled by the wealthy. And the hope, the belief, is that the more money you've sunk into this experiment, the more you want it to succeed, which means you want people to use it and build apps on it, and for it to be successful, and for there to be bug fixes and adoption, and yeah. I mean, you can spend $1 billion, buy an expensive hotel, and burn it down. Why would you do that? Rent out the rooms, get more money. So that's, we'll see. Other questions? Yeah.
How are voting rights being established so that people don't have alter egos?
Well, if it's one token, one vote, then okay, so you can have 100 tokens that you vote, or you can have 50 and 50, and then but it still adds up. Yeah, okay. It's the votes you cast times the number of tokens you've got.
Okay.
Yeah, so
you can create 1 million accounts, but you still have 1 million votes.
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is, yep, it's ruled by the wealthy, and the simple attack doesn't work. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who say, well, we need to have one person, one vote. Okay, great. Then we establish strong identity, and then you can have an enclave on top of EOS where there's one person, one vote in this domain that runs on top of the main chain run by the plutarchs, or whatever they're called. I think it's plutarchs. The rich people, right? The whales. And if they start becoming unattractive to you, you hive the thing off. Forking is a very powerful disincentive to bad behavior. Very powerful. You can't do that in a country. It's very hard to make a copy of your house in Venezuela and relocate it somehow magically somewhere else with all your stuff in it. But on a chain, if you get enough people with you, you can sail get in the Mayflower and go to the New World. Kind of like that. Not trivial, but it's much easier. And that is the ultimate disincentive. That's the ultimate market force right there. You make your EOS chain attractive to us, or we'll fork it and go elsewhere. Fork you, baby.
I have this question, right? I think you might be able to answer this. I don't know if I can find but
yeah.
In terms of how the smart contracts are they actually embedded in the blockchain, or is there a different sort of storage?
Yeah, they're so what we use. There's the command is called set code, and what it does is you have to buy some RAM. The limited resources RAM, right? The chain is this long list of transactions. It's the log of messages that have been processed. And then the current chain state is in memory, and it can get big. And so your incentive as a programmer is to keep your memory usage relatively small. So if you delete old transactions, you reduce your memory usage, and people have to look in history to go find that stuff that you've deleted because it's not in current state. But your program's got to be in current state, right? Your smart contract. Plus any data structures you're actively using.
So it's a caching layer, take it.
Sorry?
More or less like a caching layer?
Yeah, basically. I mean, we're so at the edge of my technical knowledge right now, it's pathetic. Governance I could talk about all
background.
Yeah. If this were the system global area, I would I would be down for that. But no, I've been trying to get diagrams, and we just don't have really, really good diagrams of the kind I'm used to from my Oracle days. It's sad, really.
That's good. Whet's my appetite to talk a little more to EOS. So.
I think you'll find it interesting.
I do, yeah.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about Block 1 and education. Noticed that you guys are hiring, and also I saw on the website trying to make Blacksburg, Virginia, the hub for blockchain.
Oh, we're going to hire at least 100 people in Blacksburg, Virginia.
Right.
Is my hat there? Wave my hat. That's my Virginia Tech hat. I am not a Virginia Tech graduate, but by golly, I wear that hat because I blend in. And it is a lovely little town, one of the best public school systems in the country. I was shocked. It's like number 3 in the country. It's like wacky. Really nice small town. If you like small towns, it's not a bad place. If you're going to raise a family, think about Blacksburg, folks.
not to be a wet blanket move, it's 9:30, and so I think we have to clear out for our hosts.
So after party downstairs? I'll keep talking. If you guys want to talk, I'll until you're done, I'm here. All right?
Is there a bar downstairs?
There, no, I think there's.
I thought I saw like a restaurant or a bar or something.
There's one in the
bar.
There's one in the front of the building.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is it any good?
I don't know, I don't live here, but
Who's
sure
local?
serve our purposes.
Okay.
I live down the block.
Yeah, all right.
Too, so.
Well, make the recommendation.
Yeah, give us. What do you think?
house?
Where would you put it? So we're going to end the broadcast. Bye. Thank you.
I just don't want to leave the guys hanging here, and I have to put this place back together. But really appreciate it. Glad everybody kind of stuck around and got involved, and just look for updates. But we're going to do it monthly, so you can look out. It'll be around about a month.